Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, guys, with me this evening, I have Victor Tiffany, the creator of Burn Your Bust, and he's discussing a new organization called Revolt against Plutocracy, in addition to a political strategy called CFAR that I want him to explain because I think it's an awesome idea. So, Victor Tiffany, please say hello and introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me, Jamal. I really appreciate this. Hello, everyone. My name's Victor Tiffany. I was for many years a political activist going back to the 1980s with the nuclear freeze movement. And then my first presence online was with a blog called the Glenn Beck Review, when I would spend my evenings sticking my boot up his ass. And then early 2010, of course, the Supreme Court ruled on Citizens United v. FEC that the corporations should, in fact, be able to spend large amounts of money helping us determine who we're going to vote for, basically handing control of the United States over to transnational corporations, which in my view was fully their intention. After that, I got involved with Move to Amend, worked here in New York State to help make New York State the 17th state in the union, calling on Congress to pass an amendment. Worked on that for a number of years. And then in 2014, over the course of the year, that's when Martin Gillams and Benjamin Page published the paper Testing Theories of American Politics, Elites, Interest Groups, and Average Citizens, which basically argue the United States is not a democracy. Some people, like Talking Points Memo, tried to say no longer democracy. I'm trying to figure out when it was a democracy. Was it the decade between the Civil Rights Act and the Buckley v. Vallejo? Was it the year between the campaign finance reform of 1975 and Buckley v. Vallejo in 1976? Is that the one time we actually had a democratic order in the United States? I don't know if we ever had a democratic order in the United States. Certainly a good number of people don't believe we did. But at any rate, they made a very serious political science argument that at least for the last 30 years, the United States has not been a democratic order, that the elites get the bills out of Congress that they want passed, and the average citizens get buckus. And it was during the course of that year that I stopped thinking myself as just another progressive and started thinking myself as a revolutionary. Because the way I saw it, we weren't going to win elections. There was going to be no, because the elites, and particularly with Supreme Court decisions like Buckley, going back to 76, Buckley v. Vallejo, Citizens United 2010, and then again in 2014, the FEC, when the Supreme Court once again liberated the wealthy people to donate not a couple hundred or 63,000 in an election cycle, but more like 3 million, truly liberated those who are already free to completely control and regulate our elections to their liking. So during the course of that year, I became a revolutionary, and on New Year's Day in 2015, published on the Amendment Gazette, Standing on the Edge of the Next American Revolution, making the case, kind of a blog version of Declaration of Independence, where we laid out a list of grievances, basically arguing we're drifting toward fascism. And I just want to remind everybody that's when Barack Obama, not Donald Trump, was the president of the United States. And then listed, based on those grievances, principles of revolution. How do we what principles do we use to establish a democratic order in the United States, given the fact that we're drifting further and further and further toward fascism? And I could go through some of those points to make the case. Point, unless you want me to drill down on that. At any rate, that was New Year's Day 2015. Less than about a month later, a little, maybe 5 weeks later, I read a interview with Bernie Sanders, who was testing the waters at that point, going around the country talking to people to see if there was the kind of support for a campaign he was thinking about running or not. an interview with the Washington Post, he said something about the United States needs a political revolution. My eyes kind of popped out of my head, and I thought at the time, "Whoa, he's never going to say that again," because I just thought it was a kind of a poisonous sort of political statement to make in the United States. It was risky to come out as a revolutionary. And I just want to make it clear to the NSA, who I'm sure is listening into this conversation, we are talking about peaceful revolution. We are talking about nonviolence at this point, although I would like later on in this conversation to loop back to John F. Kennedy's quote, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." I'd like to come back to that later on. But he made that statement, and I thought, wow, this is pretty remarkable. And then, of course, he framed his entire candidacy as a revolution. But meanwhile, just very quickly, I want to talk about the moment that Bernie or Bust was sparked. I share this in a book.
I was about to ask that was exactly what the question I was going to ask. When did it start?
I share this in the book that's coming out very soon, Bernie or Bust, Pioneers of Electoral Revolt. And I also described it in Philadelphia at the Bernie or Bust rally during the DNC. It was a conversation I was having on a Saturday morning at an intersection in downtown Ithaca. And a friend of mine, we were talking about, is Bernie going to run as a Democrat? Because if he could win a general election in the primaries, because the Democrats have their system so rigged against insurgent candidates like him. They're going to go with their establishment neoliberal person. We can't just put him on the ballot as a third party candidate because he could sue to get his name taken off the ballot. And my friend asked, what about a write-in campaign? And in that moment, in that instant, I thought, that's brilliant, because he can't stop us. We have the right to free speech. We have the right to free association. He can't stop us from organizing a nationwide write-in campaign on his behalf. It turns out we didn't research. We didn't research that idea. We just ran with it. And for 6 months, we started building greater and greater momentum toward the idea of a national write-in campaign if he didn't win the nomination. Basically, by the time we actually launched our website, between that conversation and the time we launched our website on June 22nd, 2015, it dawned on me, this is going to be leverage. This is leverage during the Democratic primaries. We're going to tell the Democrats, and ultimately in Philadelphia, we'll tell the superdelegates, if Bernie Sanders is not the nominee, you're going to lose the election. Right? This is leverage. This is hardcore, hard-nosed leverage. We're not going to take any other candidate. Another way of framing it is we drew a line in the sand, and we weren't going to cross that line, whether it was for Martin O'Malley or Hillary Clinton or any other candidate. So this wasn't never Hillary. This was only Bernie initially, until we found out how stupid it is. And one more point about that conversation that I like to serve as kind of a punchline. It took that intersection was the corner of Meadow Street, and I'm not making this up, the very end of Clinton Street.
Are you serious?
Absolutely.
That's cosmic. That's cosmic. That's awesome. Oh, that's awesome. I am, wow. Okay, fair enough. That so here's the thing. I hit my head on something similar, where it was this feeling of, back during the 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, you can make a case that there was other parties, and so there were other threats to the Democratic Party. Democrats can say we're the definitive left, we're least worst, because there's other things. So it was understandable that in order to stem the tide of these more radical groups, radical forces, whether socialists, communists, whatever else, that you had Democrats to kind of say, okay, we're going to put in reforms to try to stem or take the steam out of these other organizations trying to just topple the entire thing. You just had the boom in 20s, the Great Depression, all this other stuff. Well, we don't have that right now. So we don't have this thing of third parties pushing against the system, trying to get these guys to behave a particular way. Democrats for the past 30, 40 years have been able to say, we're the definitive left. There's nothing else. Whatever the left is in this country, we define it. So yeah, Republicans are going to go after you, but hey, we'll at least be apathetic. We're not going to support your aims. We're not going to push your interests or anything else. my feeling was the only stick, it's like the only club or brick at this point that you have is making them lose if they don't follow what they're supposed to follow. Meaning, if you're telling me something, if you're looking at me and you're saying, hey, I believe in climate change, and you're pushing fracking across the globe, then you're lying to me, or you don't believe in climate change. I don't know which one it is. But the problem is, it's like, we're just saying you need to toe your line. You need to live through your particular responsibilities. I don't think it's crazy in the least to say, if you don't do that, you're not getting our vote. It's like, you didn't mow the lawn. You're not getting paid for not mowing the lawn. So I felt the exact same way with this. And the Clinton campaign, and I would say those people who are heavy into this thing of, you have to vote for whatever Democrat because Republicans are insane. If Hillary Clinton won this election, none of the conversations that are taking place right now would be taking place. Like, none of this stuff about reevaluating, Medicare, people talking about leaving the party, like all these 15 million people leaving the party. I don't think any of this stuff, I don't think the tenor of the conversation would be what it is right now had she won.
There certainly would be no resistance. That's
No.
right. All those people who went down there, I don't know about all of them. The vast majority who went down there to protest the inauguration would have been attending it.
Yeah. Yeah. They would have said, oh my God, Hillary Clinton got elected. I mean, we've dodged a bullet because, everything in the world was great with Barack Obama in office. Because from their standpoint, the world fell off a cliff when Donald Trump took office. Like, in their mind, everything was going great. And then Donald Trump took office. Yeah, I think those people would be going for a coronation. I think they would be celebrating and everything else, completely oblivious to the factors that ultimately propelled Trump to be in that office in the first place. I don't think I think the leverage that people have in this point is saying, you're not getting our support if you don't follow through with our interests. I think that's a damn good strategy. Because
and we're approaching it as a kind of a series of litmus tests. Basically, that's what the contract for American renewal is. Let me just backstep before I talk about the contract itself. We were looking at trying to figure out how to follow up on Bernie or Bust. How the hell do we do something like this on a broad national scale? There's 5 of us on the committee of Revolt against Plutocracy. There's no way we can handle 468 races, 435 House races, and 33 Senate races. How do we do this? So my first question that we started to ask and try to come up with the answer to is, all right, if it's going to be progressive or bust, first question, how do you determine who's progressive and who isn't? Remember, Hillary Clinton claimed over and over again, I'm a progressive, as if Joseph Goebbels had risen from the grave and advised her, just keep repeating the big lie over and over again, and people will start believing it. So quite a few months ago, an associate of mine, someone I knew basically from working on a congressional campaign 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, I guess now, had an idea. He emailed me and he showed me his idea for candidate contracts. They weren't called CFARs then. Mm-hmm. They were just candidate contracts, and he had this that he thought, in fact, the contract itself says it's legally binding, because he thinks he's written it in a way that a judge will decide, yes, this is binding, although historically that's not been the case.
Yeah,
judges, they throw these things out. But we're thinking possibly we will challenge case law at this point if it is brought to before a judge. But our intention is not to remove people who get elected unless they really truly are lied about it. They don't do anything that they said they were going to do, and then we might hold them accountable with a class action lawsuit and try to get them yanked from office, which is in accordance to that contract, the contract for American renewal. At any rate, when I saw the candidate contract and I read through it, it hit me. If we use something like this, we don't have to teach people how to determine who's progressive and who's a pseudo progressive, right? Because that requires finding out going to open secrets, finding out who's funding their campaign, looking at their voting record if they have one, figuring out where they stood on the various. It was a complicated process.
Yeah.
The contract for American Renewal, we call it, simplifies that. You don't have to research anything. You just go to the candidates, ask him or her, them. In my case, there's 8 people running in the Democratic Party to challenge the incumbent Republican Tom Reed. There's 8 of them. So I just went down the list and asked them one at a time, would you sign the contract for American Renewal? Would you sign this contract? And basically, all the way through, they all said no. Meanwhile, I've recruited about 10 people from Twitter, candidates, right? From Twitter and from Facebook, and various, where I find a candidate running for Congress, I'll ask him or her to, I had a lot of success, but I wasn't having any success locally here. And I finally, what we did was we tweaked the contract. First thing is we replaced one of the tax increase proposals or ideas on the contract. We replaced it with a criminal justice plank for 2 reasons. One, the original candidate's contract was kind of a statement of white privilege. It just didn't do anything about social justice. It didn't address, any of the concerns coming from Black Lives Matter organization. It did nothing. So for our own reasons, we wanted to make the contract more along the lines of social justice, not just economic justice, but really truly criminal justice. And then our other concern was it was a defensive maneuver. If this becomes as big as we think it can become in the coming year, then we're going to start being attacked, just like Bernie or Bust was attacked once it built up steam.
Yeah,
it's going to be attacked by the neoliberals and the identity politics folks as being not speaking to any identity, any identity group in America. It didn't speak to anyone. So by adding the provision that any use of fatal force by a policeman in the United States must lead to an independent prosecutor.
Agreed.
Or independent investigator, not necessarily prosecutor, but independent investigator to look into it rather than right there in the police department and so forth, which we believe is one of the demands from Black Lives Matter. And it has broad support. That's another point about these 11 policy positions that are in the contract. All of them have no less than 55% support. This agenda, one of the valid criticisms of Contract for American Renewal is it doesn't go far enough, right? It doesn't say the United States needs to get out of the Middle East. It just says the United States needs to get out of Afghanistan, stop fighting that stupid war. Pouring treasury and blood into. And the reason it doesn't go that far is because it's coming from public opinion. And American people are not radical. They are broadly progressive, but they're not radically progressive. So that's why it doesn't go that far. It's not the political platform of Revolt against Plutocracy. It's not my political platform. It's coming from the people. It is a populist platform. And that's what gives it its strength.
I agree. I love this.
Yeah.
I love this on a few reasons. Language is so slippery. And, it's like Paul Ryan will get up and he says, look, we believe people should have freedom. Like, I want people to be free and I want people to have jobs, which is why we're putting this tax plan in to give multimillionaire and billionaires trillions of dollars. Freedom. Now, anybody listen to that. If you know anything about politics, Paul Ryan is full of shit when he's saying this. And Paul Ryan is purely acting in the benefit of the plutocrats. It's a very specific segment of the population, even though he will use terms like freedom and everything else. Language becomes the slippery thing that people, duck behind. Now, the guy in the Democrat that won in Virginia, he's backing away from the Medicare thing. Now, he ran on healthcare. We got to do healthcare. We need to expand healthcare. And one of the things that Terry McAuliffe, a political thumb, essentially an operative of that particular wing of the party, He did try to do was expand Medicaid. That was what one of the things he was trying to do. Obama passed Obamacare. He said, I'm going to expand Medicaid in the state. He wasn't able to do it because Republicans held the legislatures. Well, you have a new Democrat that just got in office. And even though he ran on this thing of healthcare, he is now backing away from that, saying, well, I never said Medicaid expansion. I just said healthcare. Language is an issue. So having this kind of pledge of saying, look, when you get in office, you are working for the benefit of the public, period. And these are the specific things that you're going to do. And this is the specific tenor that you're going to take in that office. And having an actual benchmark to judge them by. When this person was in office, what were the votes did this person take? And did this line up with the pledge that that person took when he, said he was going to be on for CFAR? I love that.
Yeah, just a point of correction. Pledges are so yesterday. I mean, we've had candidate pledges in the past. This is a contract. This is a binding contract. And so there's 2 points about it. Yes, we can hold them accountable. We can, even if it doesn't hold up in court, we can still take them to court. We can still scare the bejesus out of them. We can let them know we're watching and they're not doing what they made a binding commitment that they would do. That's another change, by the way, we made to the contract itself, that when I came back around here locally and started asking candidates the second time around, the very first person I asked signed it, because we took out the language of class action lawsuits. We thought that was intimidating some of the candidates who might not be willing to sign it. So we took that information out. And just for the listeners who might want to see this contract, you can find it at CFAR, CFAR 2018.us, as in the United States. That's where we send candidates. There's a video on there encouraging candidates to sign this contract, explaining all the benefits to them that comes from signing the contract. And I also want to just come back to something you vaguely alluded to in what you were just saying. The most revolutionary characteristic of this whole approach is, unlike the current situation where candidates, like these 8 candidates locally, are presenting voters with their platform. All right, so the voters look at the platforms and they read them and they decide they like candidate C's platform and the cut of her jib. Right, that's who I'm going to vote for. And that's the way politics works in this country, basically. This turns that whole relationship between voter and candidate upside down. This is the voters coming forward and saying, here's our platform, get on board or else. The CFAR itself is a tactic. The strategy, the broader strategy is CFAR or else. So step one, the voters go to the candidates and ask them to sign the contract. And maybe they don't get an answer, or maybe the answer is no. So you go to the next candidate. And eventually you got to come back and say, if you don't get somebody to sign it, you got to come back and say, well, basically we need someone to sign this contract or else, right? The or else is the 2018 version of or bust.
Yeah.
Right? Or bust was, we're going to vote Green Party candidate ultimately, because we figured out that the write-in strategy for a presidential candidate was
come back to me.
Candidate himself state, so they don't even bother counting the votes. So that was a mistake. But for congressional races in 43 states, it's actually a purposeful and useful fallback position, our plan B. If there's no CFAR candidate on the ballot, then we'll write in a CFAR candidate, even if I have to sign the contract myself and write in my own name. We're actually hoping as 2018, as November approaches, that a number of CFAR write-in candidates step up when there's no one on the ballot, when there's no CFAR candidate on the ballot. Again, this is partly a matter of getting the word out. There's a CFAR movement afoot. It's the voters taking control of the next congressional agenda. That's what's so awesome about this. Instead of, candidates going and doing the business of the party leaders or doing the business of their donors, by contract, by contractual obligation, they're going to have to go and do what the voters want. Imagine that. Having to go to Washington and do what the voters elected you to do. Having to, not I'll do it because I feel like it. I'll do it because the political bosses want us to. They have to. They're contractually obligated to go to Washington and follow up on the litmus tests that they signed on to. They don't have to sign on to all 11. In fact, we discourage taking on all 11, because the more a candidate takes on, the more it opens the door for voters to say, wow, I really like points 1 through 7, but 8 is a stopper for me. And that just, there's more, and the more you add, the more that opportunity arises. So we recommend something like 5 or 6 of those 11 points to actually use on a contract. In Texas, I'll give you an example. One of the 11 points is to pull out of Afghanistan, which is what Donald Trump campaigned on. He was going to pull out of Afghanistan, and then changed his mind once he listened to members of the deep state that he put on his cabinet. But in Texas, that might not fly, because you'd have Ted Cruz going, oh, these colors don't run, right? This red, white, and blue colors, they don't run. So not all 11 litmus tests are right in each and every congressional district and state. And it's up to the candidates to frame that contract to suit their own congressional district and or state, depending on what office they're running for.
So it sounds like there are two parts to this, or two necessary and interesting parts. So let's talk about that. So the first part to this is the public itself, meaning the public being willing to say no. Brass tacks. I mean, ultimately, the plan hinges on this idea of the public being willing to say no. The trigger to this, or the club to this, is you do this or else. You do the public's business. You do the public's will, or you don't get the public's vote. Not just you don't get the public's vote. We're voting for somebody else, another guy. Meaning, at the very least, you could lose the election. It's like, but you have to get that public to be willing to do that and get that in a critical mass. So it's the public understanding that, look, the country is moving further and further to the right. We're not getting representation from the things that we need. What we want in this political process is statistic, noise based on that last Princeton study. Should we just keep doing what we're doing, or should we do something else? I agree with you. The trigger for that one is important, because that needs to be a real specter. Like, that needs to be a real club that can actually be used to make those guys fail. So that's the first point.
Let me just touch on that, because you use the exact phrase that is spot on. Make those guys fail. This thing has two objectives. One is to get CFAR candidates elected, obviously, just like Bernie or bust. The idea was to get him the nomination. And then two, the second part of this is to make sure that the non-CFAR candidates, because in our view, if they can't CFAR, they might be neoliberals. So this is a war on neoliberals. We want to make sure they fail, at least on the Democratic Party side. Republican Party side is kind of out of our control. Yeah. We're not Republicans. We just can't deal with that. We can't handle the entire universe. We can only deal with parts of it at a time. So this is, get CFAR candidates elected, at least give them the nomination if they're Democrats. If they're not Democrats, if they're a third-party candidate and there's no CFAR Democrat, then it gives them a chance to actually gain support as this CFAR strategy starts gaining momentum and starts getting heard by more and more people around the country. Greens have a much better chance getting elected as a CFAR candidate, because it's a populist agenda, than they do just running as a Green. And that's true with Justice Party candidates, Socialist Party candidates, and any left-leaning third-party candidate. So the idea is to get CFAR candidates elected, and barring that, to make damn sure the neoliberal Democrat loses. So it has that 1-2 punch, just as you sort of alluded to there.
Yeah, I find that to be immensely necessary. I can't think of, like, you have all these people who want to reform the party. It's like, we can change it, we can change it, we can change it. It's a good heart. It's like a boyfriend that beats me, but he goes to church on Sundays, and he has a good heart deep down inside. It's like, but yeah, he slept with a maid. I know, but he has a good heart and he can change. it's this in perpetuity. These people consistently try to change the party without any leverage to try to change the party. The leverage.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's not just we want to change the party, because in our view, I mean, that sounds like what Bernie Sanders is attempting, right? He wants to change the party. Ours is a little more indifferent. We're either going to change the party or we're going to help destroy the party.
Yes. Yes. Right. Man, you're speaking my lingo. I think I've used the same thing. I don't care. My goal is to move the ball in a particular direction politically. I don't care if that's through the edifice of the Democratic Party or something else. I don't care. I just want to move the ball to a particular direction. And so it's like I'm indifferent. I'm apathetic to whether that vehicle is. I don't care what the vehicle is. I just want to go in a particular direction. And if the left-leaning vehicle in this country is not the thing to do it, then it's like, come on, we need something else. So I love this. I love this. The other part to this, though, is accountability, meaning some process that the public can look and monitor, where they don't necessarily have to keep. Because look, let's be honest. Karl Marx and some of these other guys talk about this revolutionary thing where people kind of come to their senses and go run into the post office with their pitchforks, trying to topple the government. I don't know if people are going to do that. Like, I don't know if people are going to just rise up in this kind of way. I think most people prefer an alienated government, meaning I want those things to take place, but I don't necessarily want to have to continuously invest all of my energies into looking at and micromanaging each and every person who goes into that office. The beauty of CFAR is that CFAR kind of undermines that process of saying, look, you don't have to do that. You just need to look at one particular source and see whether or not that person is towing this particular agenda. That's assuming that you're on board with this particular agenda. Accountability and some edifice where those people can look at and get some feedback saying, look, this guy was a CFAR candidate. And this guy got it there and just went ballistic in an opposite direction. This guy lied. So something like, and I guess what I'm thinking of is some site, some database, something that gets across to the individuals who's associated with the organization that this particular person didn't toe a particular line, this particular person failed on this particular vote, or whatever. But something that A, allows for accountability and allows for the public to understand what's going on at any particular time for the candidates who've signed this contract. Does that make sense?
Right. Well, yeah, of course. In the post, you're really dealing with post-election strategies. If this works, and if all we do is help neoliberal Democrats lose, we're not as successful as we want. Again, the number one aim is to get CFAR candidates elected. So if that happens, now we're looking, I mean, what you're describing is how you go about the accountability process.
Exactly.
So, we're not going to, unfortunately, there's a lot of things members of Congress do on the Hill that we can't monitor. We can't monitor every conversation they have. We don't know if they're actually advocating for this stuff or not. But we can watch and look at what bills they co-sponsor, or introduce. We can keep our eye on that. And this thing has a deadline although it's flexible. If someone says, well, I'll sign it, but I need 360 days to get all these things done, we'll be flexible and allow them the additional time. But at some point, there's going to be a deadline long before the next election that says, all right, or we can say, did you do this? Did you show us these bills or resolutions? I mean, it's not always a bill. For example, one of the 11 points is to pull out of NAFTA and CAFTA. Well, Congress isn't going to do that. That's going to come from the executive branch. So the congressional action will be to introduce a resolution to the President of the United States calling on him to pull out of NAFTA and CAFTA. Did you do that? Did you introduce that or co-sponsor a resolution to that effect? All right, so it's going to be up to, and again, we're going to build this. First, we want to get these guys elected. That's what our focus is on. But post-election, then, right, we will organize in the off year around the whole idea of holding these CFAR, they're no longer candidates, these CFAR politicians, these CFAR members of Congress, absolutely accountable by tracking their votes, tracking what bills they introduce or co-sponsor, and so forth. So, yeah, that will be sort of phase 2 of this operation, which I'm not focused on at all right now because my hands are full with phase 1, which is, you know, getting candidates to sign on to the contract, getting CFAR activists geared up so that they can go out and do what I've been doing. I mean, some people have done this. I'm not the only one out there doing it. Mm-hmm. Some people have recruited candidates. You know, that's a good step 1. During Bernie or Bust, we actually had at one point about 150 people online around the internet encouraging voters, Bernie supporters, to take the Bernie or Bust pledge.
Wow. Oh, wow.
That was a platoon of people, and that's how we built the leverage up. That's how we got approaching 100,000 people to have taken that pledge. I'm actually working that database now, and about 20% of it were duplicates.
Yeah.
So, you know, approaching 80,000, over 70,000 easily, who took that pledge. But that was done. That wasn't done because 4 or 5 of us were working that. That was done because around 150, 144, 150 people were out there encouraging people to do that. I was able to track on our website traffic to the website. I saw a single post on Huffington Post, a single comment on a Huffington Post story about the election that one of our volunteers put down in the comment with a link to our website, drew 1,000 visits from that one comment on that one post. And that was roughly 500 pledges. Just because we could track pledges and we could track traffic, and it always came out to about 50%. About 1 out of 2 people visiting the website would take the pledge. So that was great, and that was done all over the country on all media platforms, news platforms, and social media platforms, and so forth.
You don't feel ashamed being manipulated by Vladimir Putin in this way?
Yeah.
I mean, you've allowed Russia to steal the election. You know, this Vladimir Putin is moving to pieces. 2 questions.
They are using that. I've read just recently.
Yeah, they are.
They are using that as a
ridiculousness.
As an attack on us on the left, right? If you are against Hillary Clinton, why, you must be a Russian stooge.
The problem
is absolutely ridiculous. It's McCarthyism coming from liberals this time, not coming from Joe McCarthy and right-wing whack jobs like Glenn Beck. It's coming from liberals who I always thought were fairly respectable.
No. The integrity has nothing to do with this. Like, it's what I've realized by watching the political thing. I think a lot of people has had their eyes open. So people used to watch Rachel Maddow and everything else. And those people, like me, came into their political awareness when George Bush was in office. So you see Keith Olbermann, Rachel Maddow, you see these guys going balls out at the Bush administration, and you don't like the Bush administration. You think to yourself, well, hey, these guys are lefties. These guys are going after this administration. Then Obama takes office, and all these guys shut up. Same issues, but they shut up. And what you realize is, oh, I see. These guys are not bound by their values. They're bound by their party, which means their values are all over the place. It could be anything. So you can have some lefty arguing why drone strikes are okay and trying to defend Obama during the election. You know, when roles were reversed, if they were having the exact same conversation, it was George Bush, they would be on the opposite side of that argument. It's,
in some ways, particularly in foreign policy, I think Obama was to George Bush's right.
He wasn't. He at the very least expanded. Yes, I'm going to agree with that. I mean, when you have a president that drone strikes an American citizen and then makes the argument that the executive branch has authority to kill American citizens.
That's due process, don't you know?
That's due process. Due process can take place in the executive. This is an amazing argument, though. Like,
due process took place between here and here.
That's an amazing. Can you imagine if Donald Trump did that? Donald Trump sends some wacko out saying, "Look, the president of the United States, due process can go through the president of the United States. It doesn't have to go through the judicial branch." That is an amazing statement. That's like Congress saying, look, we know foreign policy is supposed to be the domain of the president, but we ourselves have taken it upon ourselves to make certain decisions to undermine the president. I've just found that to be an amazing argument. Let me ask you this. I've given this argument on more than one occasion. on why certain people who say, look, you have to vote for the Democrat in the election, regardless of what takes place, meaning you have to vote for the Democrat. I've given many arguments on why that's wrong, particularly from the context of a larger context. Like if you're having an argument and you're zeroing down on, well, hey, who do you think Trump is going to put in for the Supreme Court? Okay, fair enough. Like that's a difficult thing to get in if you're looking at the very specific case, because it's just as an obvious thing, Trump is going to put somebody in gross. Now, if you expand that out to 20 or 30 years, though, and you're like, but wait a minute, all of these institutions that were supposed to be supported by the left have been destroyed. Like, and the groups that are supposed to be represented by the left is being ignored. You've gamed the system in a way where you've allowed one party to be so crazy and rapid that everyone is stuck with the other party, meaning all of these groups are staying with this Democratic Party because they're just terrified of Republicans. You've gamed the system. Now, those people who make this argument of, well, you have to vote for the Democrat in every situation completely misses the fact that you're not voting for people purely for political ends. You're voting for people because you want to actually get stuff done. Meaning, if the parties are moving consistently over to the right, and you can look at this, you can see this, going from Clinton to Obama, you can see the policies that these guys were putting in place, and these things were getting worse. Like the Trans-Pacific Partnership outgrosses NAFTA in spades. If you could see this, and you still say, regardless of what takes place, you have to vote for the Democrat, that seems to be somewhat of a flawed argument. What is your argument when people look at you and say, well, you don't want Donald Trump in that office, do you? Well, it's like you doing burn or bust, make it Donald Trump in that office. What is the argument that you use to try to get this thing across of your least worst is giving you at some point just the worst?
Well, you put your you hit the nail on the head when you referenced the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I brought this up in Philadelphia, and I hammered it home again and again and again in Bernie or Bust, the book that should be coming out here. It should have been out weeks ago and will be coming out soon. In Philadelphia, I argued that we were given a choice between two revolting and dangerous plutocrats. Trump is way more revolting, and Hillary Clinton was way more dangerous. And most people can't even begin to wrap their head around that, because after all, Trump's going to nominate jerks like Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. And he's going, and indeed, Trump will lead this country backwards, set this country back decades. Because of people like Gorsuch. There's no question about that. The problem was, the alternative was Hillary Clinton. I never bought for a second that she was against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. She learned how to tell that lie from Obama. Remember, Obama ran on the idea of renegotiating NAFTA.
Yep.
And then it turns out Goolsbee went to Canada and confided, oh, that's just politics. Don't worry about it. And then she's doing the same, and she was doing the same thing. She's saying, I'm against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but we knew that was bullshit. She's called that the gold standard of trade agreements. And if you want corporations to run the world, it is the gold standard. And that's the problem with Hillary Clinton. One of two major reasons why she's more dangerous. Yes, the Supreme Court is going to set us back decades, but the kind of, and this is hard for people to wrap their heads around, because these so-called free trade agreements are so unprecedented and they're so new. What they're doing is attempting a corporate globalization that is turning it. It's a coup d'etat. The coup d'etat has took place already. Citizens United put it into motion in 2010. They got the House, and in 2014 they got the Senate. So, and they already had the executive branch. Surprise! Obama's a neoliberal. Yeah. So the coup d'etat was over in 2014. Now they're attempting to literally reshape. What did Obama call for 5 days before the election in 2008? A fundamental transformation in the United States. And that's exactly what the Trans-Pacific Partnership would have led to. Not in a good way. It would have changed. This thing was so transformative, it should have been dealt with as an amendment to the Constitution. It would have annihilate the 10th Amendment when it comes to regulating the behavior of corporations operating in the United States. Foreign corporations, not even American corporations.
Yeah.
Foreign corporations operating in the United States. The 10th Amendment would have been rendered null and void. The whole idea of a democratic self-government would have been null and void. It wouldn't matter when it comes to doing those activities, which is what our representatives are supposed to do. They're supposed to represent us, and if we want their behavior regulated, then that's what representatives and government are supposed to do. If this thing had gone through, it wouldn't matter if we had voted for green, libertarian, blue, or red. All their hands would be tied by the rules and regulations contained within this Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would be treated as the law of the land. It was fundamentally transformative in a very horrible way. It would have produced a corporate dystopia. All right, so this is what people have a hard time wrapping their heads around, is this unknown thing that we were moving toward. And I actually had a county legislator when I was trying to get a resolution passed by the county calling on Congress to reject the TPP. I actually had one of them accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, God.
Like, no, dude, this is online. Just go read this thing. And the problem is, of course, if you're not an international trade lawyer, you can't read this thing because it's written in legalese. I mean, I can't understand it. If it weren't for trade lawyers working for Public Citizen and people like that, I'd have no idea what was in it.
Well, some of this stuff, when they're talking like investor-state dispute and that type of stuff, like, you know, we make this point that it undermines the sovereignty of the United States. They shouldn't even call it a trade deal. It's most of the stuff doesn't have anything to do with this idea of trade. It has, you know, it's undermining workers and labor and safety regulations. You know, somebody spills some chemical in my backyard and my neighbor's kid gets sick. I don't even know if they have a kid, but whatever. My neighbor's kid gets sick. If you do anything to try to make some kind of regulation, the company can sue for the profits that it didn't get because of the regulation that you instituted. That is amazing. Like,
yeah, that took place under NAFTA. That wasn't a TPP thing. I mean, TPP had that chapter. That was in place under NAFTA. This is when this corporate globalization actually got a good footing, was under NAFTA. Back then, I wasn't aware of what was going on. I didn't know what Seattle in, what was that, 1999, or was it 2000?
When it was passed?
The big thing in Seattle with the World Trade Association.
You know, the WTO, where they took
the WTO, where they
took the United States to court because of the nets, the tuna fish nets.
Well, all the huge public protests. There was a meeting there, and all people from all over the country converged, right? And there was some anarchists smashing windows, and it was a big deal at the time. Back then, I had no idea what the hell everyone was so upset about. It wasn't until initially I read an article at the same place I published Standing on the Edge of the Next American Revolution. The publisher published an article entitled Trans-Pacific Partnership is Citizens United on Crack.
It is.
And I couldn't understand that. I couldn't understand exactly how it could be that much worse until I started studying this thing.
You can read it. It's on WikiLeaks.
Yeah, but it's legalese. Right? It helps to have the interpretation of trade lawyers, public interest trade lawyers, reading this and interpreting for us, particularly investor-state dispute settlement. I mean, that is such a undermining of not just sovereignty. You want to know what to call these things. It's not even a trade agreement. You're right. It's corporate self-government.
Yeah.
And that will replace our supposed democratic self-government. It's truly transformative. Just like Obama said, fundamental transformation of the United States. But who knew what he was referring to when he uttered that phrase?
Hence my point that words are slippery. Like, even the part, you know, transformation is understatement. This is what I mean when I say they shouldn't even call it a trade deal. Well, one of the tenets of it, either I may be talking about TISA, this particular one, or the one that's in Britain. If you privatize an industry, say for instance you have universal health care, you privatize the healthcare industry, you're not allowed to go back to the public option. Like, some of this stuff was literally getting into the minutia of your laws, your you know, the fundamentals of your country. It had nothing to do with trade at all. I mean,
I know it was a corporate coup. It was absolutely. So a lot of ways to refer to it. It's a coup. I call it a coup de law. You know, a sudden change of the laws. Yeah. A corporate power grab is what Chris Hedges refers to it as.
Without talking to the public, by the way.
It's like totally historically unprecedented what they were attempting to do. And one of the questions I asked you in our earlier conversation was, you know, why do we need a revolution? Well, and for me, this is a key element of why we need a revolution. what the neoliberals are attempting to do, this whole lengthy process over the years, I mean, again, it's probably started before NAFTA. It probably started with agreement on tariffs, trade and tariffs, or general agreement on trade and tariffs, GATT, and proceeded to the World Trade Association. And then, of course, with NAFTA, you had the investor-state dispute. This whole advance of corporate globalization that's underway is a project of neoliberals.
Yeah.
And neoliberalism is the ideology of the mainstream, whether you're talking Democrat or Republican. Business, mainstream, Democrat or Republican, are neoliberals. And that's true also in virtually every country around the world. Obviously not North Korea, not Cuba, not Venezuela, but virtually everywhere else, including China and Russia. Neoliberalism is the ruling ideology. And that's why Bernie was such a threat. Because when he talked about establishment economics, he's talking about neoliberalism.
Yeah, he is.
Cornel West made that clear in his when he spoke on behalf of Bernie. He didn't use establishment economics. He used the word neoliberalism.
And class. He used class. Like the most amazing. I think Sanders was threatening for a few reasons. I mean, he's threatening to the party establishment just because he's to the left of the party establishment. That means you're not the definitive left. This guy is clearly a lefty, and this guy clearly believes it. And in the other way, he brings up issues of class unabashedly. Like, it's no sheepish, stepping around this idea of class warfare and everything else. Bernie Sanders, if you give him a mic, well, within a few seconds, the billionaires are on our backs. We got to fight the billionaires and all this other stuff. Unabashed. I've never seen that. I've never seen it. Chris Hayes had Tom Perez. I always use this because I think this is emblematic of the crux of the issue and the crux of the comparison in regards to somebody who is representing your interests or trying to versus somebody who is not and just giving lip service. Tom Perez jumps around the country from pillar to post screaming about his values. Nobody knows what these values are, but Tom Perez screams about them nonetheless. He's sitting on a couch with Bernie Sanders. Now, this is an amazing scene in and of itself because Tom Perez seems so diminutive sitting beside Bernie Sanders. And Chris Hayes asked him a basic question. He said, look, Tom, it seems like Sanders points to a bad guy. Like, Sanders essentially kind of points out that this issue is class and that ultimately you need to focus your energies on changing something fundamentally in the country itself to not allow one faction or one demographic to subjugate the other. That Chris Hayes said it in a different way, but that's basically what he said. When he asked Sanders almost said bourgeois, like he was that far into the socialist thing. Tom Perez says, I think you're giving me a false choice, Chris. Couldn't touch it. Couldn't touch it in the least. I think
no, because those are the donors. Those are the Democratic donors.
Those are his donors, exactly. When Sanders gets his money, he gets his money from the public itself. He has no restraints on what he's going to say. Tom Perez has those restraints. When that other plutocrat came out on MSNBC saying, you guys need to shut up about this class stuff, and he's talking about Nancy Pelosi, he called Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, said, shut up about class. That is an amazing thing. Like, and you get across this thing of, oh, these guys are just bought. These guys are just bought. Tom Perez couldn't say a word about that stuff because Tom Perez would not get any more donors' checks if he said something like Bernie Sanders was saying. These guys are bought. These guys are openly bought. What do you mean by revolt? Give me your definition of revolt in this sense. You're not talking about people taking pitchforks and eating the rich. You're talking about something else and something specific. What do you mean by revolt?
Well, revolt against plutocracy is a name change from pitchforks against plutocracy. As a matter of fact, and that came.
Are you serious?
Yeah, absolutely true. We toned it down. We started Bernie or bust. And we used pitchforks because of the leaked conversation Obama had in the White House with Wall Street bankers when he told them, I'm the only thing standing between you and the pitchforks. And he actually says even way more damning things than that. But at that point, we heard that statement. We said, well, we're the pitchforks. Here you are.
We're the bitter.
We are the pitchforks. So yeah, actually, we are talking about, whatever it's going to take, whether it's surrounding the house and torches and pitchforks. Of course, now it's a different plutocrat. People recognize them as such, and it's not hard to distinguish. The revolt is it's covered, I think, in the subtitle of the book, Pioneers of Electoral Revolt. We are doing things. Bernie or bust was unprecedented. We had no history book to go by. We had no guidance to go by. We made mistakes because we were the first ones doing this. That's why it started out as a writing campaign before. The whole thing should have been called Bernie or Green 2016. But we just, again, we were just cutting our way through the electoral deep growth that was all around us. And we had to go off in the wrong direction a couple times before we finally got on course, going to what we're doing exactly what we should have been doing from the get-go. It's a revolt. It's basically a an ideological litmus test. Only instead of a single issue, it's basically we're done with neoliberals. We're simply we are rejecting. It's a rejection. What is the revolt? It's a rejection of all things neoliberals. It is a war on neoliberals and their ideology. So it's a revolt against not just plutocracy, right, the rule of the wealthy. It is an attempt to legalize democratic order. There's a movie or a documentary put out by Move to Amend called Legalizing Democracy. And I come out of Move to Amend. That's I was active with them for a number of years, and I'm influenced by their more militant stand. This is a sort of militant approach to electoral politics. We are the grassroots electoral. We are the grassroots electoral wing of the revolution, whatever the revolution means, you know, because revolutions are backed by movements. Right. Revolutions are not top down. And movements have to back the revolution. So our idea of building a movement that would only support Bernie Sanders was an attempt to build that sort of grassroots support for a revolution. If it wasn't Bernie in 2016, it might be Tulsi in 2020. It might be someone else in 2020. I mean, the idea is to build based upon we're done supporting neoliberals.
Agreed.
And we're only going to support progressives from now on because we're done basically voting against our own interests.
And that starts with no. Like I personally, I think a revolution literally starts with no, where we're done. I think it starts far simpler than the other items. It's like, what do you want to accomplish? Yes, I understand what you want to accomplish, but first, at the very least, people need to be willing to say no. We're done. And until that gets across, nothing else takes place. Like if it's not being squeamish about it. Like we need to admit that we have a fundamental problem in the way that we do run our elections, tally our elections, and even the system itself with regards to our political apparatus. Those things, for the most part, are immensely flawed, and you can make cases to say they're broken. I mean, obviously, you have plutocrats out here talking about, bribing.
It's not broken.
Politicians. Yeah, it's so. I am in agreement with you. I think most people would be in agreement with you that something is off in the way that we do our elections. At the very least, the left and the right would agree on this point. And I also agree that having people. I think the linchpin of this is getting people to be able to say no. That it starts there, but it needs to go further in regards to after the fact. Look, so getting the people to say no is the first part, but we need to change how we do our politics. I'm talking about fundamental change in the way we do our politics, and particularly with regards to elections. If we can't know who gets elected, because I got to be honest, I don't trust the way our electoral system is set up. And oftentimes, if you bring this up on CNN or somewhere else, they'll talk down to the person. Oh, our elections are, there's nothing wrong with our elections and anything else. Fair enough. Prove it. And they never like to do that, meaning they don't like recounts. They don't like these things of being able to actually see who actually won an election. It becomes just gamesmanship where the state starts, monkeying around with the apparatus. But in this very specific case, Accountability, I think, is a big deal and something that should be a plank on that thing. Meaning, if that person is not towing a particular line, do you have the capacity to recall that person? I, I personally, I think that should be instantiated in politics everywhere, just from the citizen standpoint, the civilian looking at the process saying, I want to have better, more acute control of my government. And this goes for libertarians and anybody else. I mean, the biggest argument that libertarians, when you're listening to these guys, they're like, well, I want to be closer to the means of control. I want to have more control over the apparatus. That will give them more control over the apparatus, to being able to recall these guys if these guys do something off the wall. I guess my thing is it's up in the air on whether this is a legal document. Is that fair? Like, whether or not you can essentially say, okay, this guy is trying to privatize Social Security after running as a flaming lefty. Does your document, or does CFAR have the capacity to recall the individual if they're doing something? Well, right now, that's somewhat of a sketchy prospect. I know you said the courts have been somewhat dicey on this.
No, not dicey at all. They've actually rejected these, but they've never faced this particular contract before, which is pretty explicit. It's self-referred to as legally binding, and normally these contracts are not self-referenced as legally binding. Contract with America from 1994 was not legally binding.
What's in the contract, by the way? I never asked. What are the tenets of the contract that you're asking these guys to sign?
I'm gonna have to go to our website and tell you. I know a few of them off the top of my head.
Oh, go for it.
I think I mentioned pulling out of Afghanistan was one of them. Medicare for all is another one of them. Where's my website? Okay. Pulling out of CAFTA and NAFTA. Plank. Let's just get down here. Of course, my computer wants to run slow when you ask me a question like this.
You're fine. Let me ask you this, by the way.
It's slow all day.
People bring this up, and I have my own point of view on it. Do you believe that? So Sanders ran in a race. This is, for whatever reason, this is a big issue on the left, and the issue is interesting to me, so I'm bringing it up. Sanders ran in the race. In running in that race, Sanders was openly cheated in that race, and we knew he was openly cheated from our own eyes. You know, we're not insane. We could see reality and say, hey, that looks a little sketchy to me. 200,000 people off the rolls in New York. This looks sketchy. WikiLeaks, and then Donald Brazil. Now, all of these things got across in a very clear way that Bernie Sanders was cheated. Do you believe that he was cheated, or do you believe he was complicit in it? Meaning, do you believe he was part, I guess, of a strategy to try to sheepdog people through the process? I personally, I got to be honest, I don't necessarily buy into that particular thing. But do you believe he had any level of complicity to what took place in the primaries?
That's the argument. I don't believe so. I think he's got his own master plan, and he's not letting us in on it.
Me too.
But he may not have wanted to rock the boat. 2016, once these it was clear, as you said. I mean, I'll go to other examples. County all across the country, we had exit polls from what the far enough off that would be considered null and void if they were that far off.
They didn't even do it in
the United States. Well, and that's what I was just going to go to, because it said that the media's so forth. They're the ones doing the exit polls, finding these outcomes so far off from the exit polls. They just stopped doing them,
which is amazing. Like, no curiosity at all. Yeah, no curiosity.
They didn't want to have to face these questions. Why are these polls off so far? Almost as if collusion with the Clinton campaign. Oh, wait, that's right. They were in collusion.
They were.
As Tim Black said at the Bernie or Bust rally, it may be dangerous, but he can't tell the media what to print. and the Clinton campaign did. I mean,
they did.
Why did the media push Trump so much? Because the Clinton campaign told them to. That's bizarre.
Profitable.
can a campaign tell a media what to do?
Well, people
And the
think,
answer is they were in bed.
yeah,
They were in bed together. I mean, they're all neoliberals. They're all part of the same big club, and you and I aren't part of it.
And access, like when they're passing that stuff back and forth, and you have a reporter sending somebody something to the Clinton Foundation in order to get it vetted, and you're like, what? Why are you sending the campaign that you yourself are supposed to be scrutinizing information? You know what I mean? It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. And you get to see behind the scenes on these guys where just the collusion that takes place. Now,
I was going to say that's the word I wanted to bring up. Oh, Trump-Russia collusion. No, talk about the Clinton campaign media collusion. That's where there was collusion. Interference in the 2016 primaries didn't come from Russia. It came from
them. Yeah, it's almost,
I want to talk about the Clinton machine, and by that there's, I mean, just 20 different ways that they corrupted the primaries. I saw a video. The guy's taken it down since I watched it. It's an amazing story. He was a former Clinton supporter who became a Bernie supporter because he liked Bernie's platform. And then he got involved with the campaign, and he was really a first-time activist. He's probably in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. And the Sanders campaign just completely drafted him and got him to do more and more, and eventually made him a precinct captain.
Oh, wow.
Right, for the caucuses. So he went to the caucuses, and as the precinct captain, of course, he met his part, and I think O'Malley was still in it at the time. And then there was this out-of-state Clinton operative from California who was very, very helpful, just working with this and that and the other thing. His story is how I became Bernie or bust, which is why it caught my attention. And then, so they went through the caucus, and the captain took the names and addresses, contact information of the Bernie delegates, right? Because Clinton won some delegates, Bernie won some delegates, and they all went home. Mm-hmm. Then, afterwards, the professional Clinton supporter from out of state went up to the precinct captain, the Bernie precinct captain, and said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. You got to fill out your delegates have to fill out this triplicate form," right? So because he had their contact information, he filled them out and turned in copies and kept the pink copies, which he took to the first state convention. Remember, there were two different conventions. Bernie won the first state convention. Clinton delegates apparently stayed home or something. But he gets to this convention, and he's standing around with other Bernie, and he's telling them this story, and he pulls out from his pocket this wad of the pink copies for his delegates. And every Bernie precinct captain in this circle of conversation and pulled out their pink copies with a virtually identical story. It was not an accident. They very systematically tried to undermine this Bernie with this form that was required, and they didn't bring it out until after the delegates went home all across the state.
I'm not shocked by that.
That's just one of dozens of ways. The voter suppression in New York, the voter suppression in California.
They stole Nevada outright. It's like
they apparently stole Nevada outright.
And
then, of course, there's the media colluding with the establishment, claiming that Bernie Kratz were throwing chairs, and no one ever threw a chair.
Yeah, nobody was throwing a chair.
Right. So there was all kinds of collusion between the Clinton campaign and the media, and going back to these. How did that happen? There's so many different ways you could approach a voting machine. You can write the software in a way that has a predetermined outcome. You can affect the machine. This was actually done this year in, I think there was a convention of voting machines in California. I forget what it was called. And they hacked every one of those machines right there on site. And then there's the communication between the polling place and the central, right? That in that transmission, change the outcome, and then send the votes onward to the county computer. The centralized computer, many of them have something called GEMS files.
Yeah.
All right, and you can get in there and you can manipulate the numbers, which is the outcome of these gem files, which is the vote count. It would be a fraction, which you have to truncate because there's no such thing as a 3.25 voters. Really, where did the quarter voter come from? So they have to truncate from the decimal point on, so it doesn't, they don't get caught doing this. And that's another way is this voter manipulation of requiring the so-called master key to be able to do this. But there's an online YouTube video showing exactly how this is done. They show a demonstration. This guy's sitting there going through, gets on various county computers. Here's the gem files, and he does this routine. And here's our desired outcome. So many different ways that these exit polls could have varied from the outcomes. There's so many different ways that could have happened. And one of the things we want to do for CFAR, we want to delete one of the tax increase policy positions on the CFAR in a preference for hand-counted paper ballots mandated nationwide.
Agreed. Yeah.
But because this is a populist agenda, we're still looking. If anybody listening to this, what we're looking for, we need polling information that shows more percent of American people do not trust the electronic system we have today. Supposedly, there's some distrust out there. I don't know if the polls aren't being asked. That would be my guess. They're not even asking those questions yet. But for some reason, we can't find polls that indicate American people don't trust the new electronic voting system that have been put in place. Once we find that, then we can change one of the form positions and swap it out with mandated hand-counted paper ballots. You can address something you brought up earlier in the conversation, which is election integrity.
Yeah, it hand counts, allowing people for a recount. I would even say having people to be able to watch as those votes are being counted. I find that to be probably the most.
That's routine. That's the way it used to be, right? It was always bipartisan. You had a Republican on hand, you had a Democrat on hand watching this vote count take place so they couldn't cheat.
Yeah, that just seems the most natural thing in the world. Adding the machine to the process becomes this black box and somewhat of a fail point. And I'm always amazed that the media looks at this and says, this is unimpeachable. This is unimpeachable. There's
questionable. They don't even bring it up. They don't discuss it. To my knowledge, I have not even seen this being discussed.
Well, I've saw it being discussed, unfortunately, but the pedophile in Alabama comes out saying, I don't trust the elections. And he's like, it's like all these darkies were voting. I'm suspicious of all these people voting. And so he comes out as being the banner, the standard bearer for election integrity. And it's like, oh God, dude, why you? Like,
right message, wrong messenger.
Right, wrong messenger. I made this video kind of making this point, like, God damn it, I would prefer it not to be this guy. But pretend it's not him. Pretend it's just random, Jim Bob Jones in Alabama that says, I want to make sure that the votes are what they're supposed to be. The point of this is to make sure that the public elects who the public wants. Not politics, but that the public elects who it wants. If the public looks at this and says, we want Bob Jones, and Bob Jones is somewhat of a spotty record, the public chose a guy. I don't have to like what the public chose. What I want is the apparatus in place where people have the capacity to make sure that the votes are counted and that they're honest in those vote counts. And
you would think that
would be natural everyone in the world. Yeah, most natural thing in the world. And when they brought it up on CNN, that journalist, the woman who was looking at it, was like, didn't even engage the topic, wouldn't touch it. Instead, she went to this thing of, well, hey, one of your experts believed that John F. Kennedy wasn't killed in the way that people say John F. Kennedy was killed. And you're like, what does this have to do with what I just brought up?
Because they're trying to undermine his statement.
Exactly.
Right? They're trying to say, you're a conspiracy theorist. You can't be trusted. So don't listen. To
experts. And it's like,
he was interviewed by Lee Camp on his VIP series. I know who you mean.
Yeah. Yep. They don't like to touch it.
I can't think of his name. Right. No, they don't want to discuss it. They think everything's just fine the way it is.
But there's a reason for that. I always make this point that there's collusion between media and government. This idea of the establishment is both. It's not one or the other. These things feed off each other. Like, so there's a certain idea of the world that's propagated through media, and that's kind of reflected back and forth between government and media. Information kind of flows both ways. On issues of war, the media falls in line with whatever the government tells. So if the government wants to go into Iraq and kill 1 million people, the media jumps into it, falls in line, and all of a sudden everybody's on a war footing. So you get
if you don't, you get fired.
Or you get fired.
Phil Donahue got fired.
Jump on board. That's right. Now, the catch for this is, I think the same thing for elections. Like, what happens to a country when the edifice that's in place to help determine who gets power, meaning who runs, who makes the choices, when the public finds out that this is somewhat of a sham, like this is not doing what we said it's doing, and ultimately your choice is not really your choice at all, you've completely decapitated any idea of a representative democracy at that point. I would imagine that is not something they want to touch. You don't want the land of the free and home of the brave, and then you find out that you don't really have elections or fair elections in some of these places. I think that's one of those things that media agrees with government on, and they don't want to touch for that specific reason. One government taking power is the toppling of another government. We do it in a peaceful way through this edifice of elections. If you say that the election process is flawed in some way, then you no longer have a representative government. And the thing that you thought you were doing to affect your will in the political apparatus and the decisions of this country was somewhat null and void. I don't think they want to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
No, we in our previous conversation we talked about media does what American politics does, which is playing between the 40-yard lines, to use his metaphor.
That's right.
Or, what's acceptable discourse in politics and what's not. Seeing the legitimacy of American systems is outside of the 40-yard line. It's out there on the 20-yard line. You can't discuss that. We're going to keep everything right here within the boundaries of the 40-yard lines, right? Keep everything centrist. You might hear this on or RT, and of course, the corporate media is doing their very
they're going
level best to delegitimize RT. I listen to and pay attention to more than anyone else. Chris Hedges,
love the guy,
and Lee Camp,
love that guy too.
Yeah. So
Russian minions, both of them are Russian minions.
Yeah, I mean, we are.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah,
it is.
Tell me this. So, what does the revolt look like ultimately? Like, I understand. So, let's say if we're agreeing that there are problems with our political apparatus, can we say that the revolt itself does that need to take place outside of the political apparatus? Meaning, is trying to just get candidates at this point somewhat of a sketchy idea because the political system itself is somewhat corrupted? Meaning, so I'm not. Let me say it this way: I'm not saying that every vote that a person makes is somehow stolen or taken or anything else. I don't want to get that across. I'm saying that as the public, we should be able to know with a certain degree of certainty that those things are valid. And right now, those things are massively ambiguous. And I would say that you have a lot of people on the left and the right specifically that says we don't trust this voting process. They say it for different reasons, but they say we don't trust this voting process. If that's true, where does the revolution take place? Does it take place in the political apparatus, or does it take place outside of the political apparatus? And if it takes place outside, what does that look like in the real world?
Well, claim to own a monopoly on revolting.
No, I don't take it that way. I'm
The
just
electoral system. So for us, answer, but I don't think it's the broad answer. I think there are other answers too. This is a state-by-state fight until you is in place that will mandate this around the country. Citizens in each and every state are going to have to go to the legislature and demand for ballots. Is it just it's citizen lobbying? It's electioneering, right? Hey, this candidate wants to fix the electoral system. This candidate doesn't. Getting the right people elected at the state level. This is where that generally occurs. The state has their own election system. And it also can be, you don't see march on Washington for legitimate elections yet, but there's no reason we can't have one. I'm not sure how aware the public is that we have a very serious problem. I don't think they even understand we have illegitimate elections at this point.
I don't think
and as long as we have electronic elections, or at very least, right? We just don't know if they've been hacked or not. You know, the 4 election was hacked, and it wasn't by Russians. Republican operative that got into the Ohio system and somehow changed the outcome from what the exit polls were saying and won the state. That was a hacked election. It wasn't because the Russians hacked it, right? That was something done here domestically.
This Russian stuff is
it's an excuse. It's the dog ate my homework.
Yeah, they've been screaming about this for a year and haven't showed squat. Donna Brazile on Tim Black was like, just trust us. Trust us. We got information. Just trust us. We're the Democratic Party. Well, of course you can trust us. Like, I've seen the information. They just trust me. And you're like, but
we're the Democratic Party. It's a good reason to not trust them.
Right. It's like, if you have that information, what's more likely? You have that information, you sure it or you're not sure? Like, are we honestly going to believe that if they didn't have a smoking gun, they wouldn't be out there showing that from pillar to post on every news show? Like, come on. It's been a year. They have squat. And yet they still go with the same.
Did you see the interview between the host of The Real News and the author of the book Collusion?
Yes.
There's that's reporting. You don't see anything like that on corporate media for
I reviewed
whatever reason.
Video. I reviewed that video. Yeah. I went through that video. Man, are you talking about?
Can't stress the usefulness of that 20 minutes spent listening to that interview. But you can hear the author's voice winding up. He was getting more and more because this guy was debunking his collusion theory.
Well, he ended up with Putin as a bad guy.
Context. You got to look at Putin's a bad guy.
Putin's a bad guy. That's what he ended up. Putin is a bad guy.
The host says, "Look, we're not arguing. We agree Putin's a bad guy. That's not what's at stake here. Was there collusion? Where's the proof of the collusion?" The guy could not come up with any.
He said, I grant you.
The meeting they had in Trump Tower, and the guy knew his stuff. He knew stuff I didn't know, which was something I'm always impressed by. But the fact that they weren't even discussing the leaked emails in that meeting.
Yeah.
With Donald Trump Jr. and Manafort and the others who were there. It wasn't even. They weren't even. The Russians didn't even have the supposedly hacked emails that Julian Assange keeps arguing they weren't hacked, they were leaked.
Yeah, Russians were naive on this point. That woman was going to say Clinton broke campaign finance laws. She was just giving documents showing Clinton getting money from the Russian thing. And that by itself, like, when you delve into what they wanted to give the Trump campaign, and Trump campaign was like, this is it? This is all you got? He was breaking campaign finance laws in the primaries. You're telling us about her getting more money from Russia. Like, he looked at it as, this is nothing. This is nothing. Now, we also have to believe that Putin has to interact with Donald Trump in order to do it. Meaning, even if you grant them that Russia did it, which I don't grant them because it was a leak, not a hack. Even if you grant them that, though, it's still this thing of, but why does Putin have to collude with Trump for this? Like, why does he have to have a conversation with Donald Trump? Say, hey, I'm going to hack those elections, by the way, whatever hack means in this case. We're going to hack the DNC. We're going to release this information. Is this okay with you? Why would he have to do that? I don't understand. Like, this story does not make sense. And the story falls apart when you start picking at the pieces of what do you actually know. That guy wrote the book on collusion and in no way could get across collusion. It was an amazing dismantling. I've never loved it.
It was awesome. Look, I think we have to be careful. I think we have to be careful how we reference this. The Russians clearly had a dog in that race.
Yeah,
right? Clinton wanted to go to war against Russia.
That's right.
To get along with Russia. And on that matter, when it comes to Trump wanting to get along with Putin and wanting to cooperate with Russia, as I point out in Bernie or Bust the book, we support him. I mean, there's not much we support Trump. Getting along with Russia is one of those things we think is a damn good idea, especially since all the other or most of the other nuclear weapons pointing at us.
Yeah.
So getting along with them, cooperating with them, and building a warmer relationship with them fully support Trump on. It's hard to actually say those words. Serious. We actually do support Trump when it comes to détente. Is the word they used to use.
Yeah.
With Russia. That point, my point I'm trying to make here is, I think they did interfere. I'm not sure they actually caused the outcome as much as Hillary Clinton caused the outcome by being a neoliberal. I think that's why Trump got elected, not because 50,000 hours on Facebook social media ads right. and wrote a few fake news stories. I don't think that swung the election.
It's comically ridiculous. Yeah, it really is.
But they tried. I think it's important to not neglect the fact that the Russians certainly tried, and they probably will try again. And oh my God, it's what's that called? Karma, right? Because we did that to them.
We do everywhere else. I've always made this argument that whether they did or not, I don't know. Like, I can't flat fact say they did or they did. What I do know is they've presented no smoking gun evidence to back up their claims. That's the point I continuously make. It's like, I can believe that it took place if you show me that it took place. But up to this point, it's we hate Trump, and because we hate Trump, we're gonna just be okay with this idea of Trump and Russia collusion. And it has other negative consequences. It constrains Trump's behavior in that office, meaning it makes him more hawkish to push back against the story itself. Like as a politician, you can constrain somebody else's behavior by putting in a narrative. So, tax and spend Democrats become a little bit less willing to do that because they don't want to fit into the narrative of being quote unquote tax and spend. There are other reasons they don't, but this narrative thing. So Bill Clinton can pass NAFTA, even though Republicans would have had a harder time passing NAFTA because Bill Clinton's a Democrat and it doesn't fit into the narrative of a Democrat to do that. And in Trump's case, he's being hit with this thing of where anything that he does that's conciliatory towards Russia gets folded into this narrative of Trump and Russia colluding with one another. It makes him more hawkish. I honestly believe that some of the stuff, like giving weapons over to Ukraine, that's fucking amazing. You're talking about a proxy war that the United States is getting involved in. The United States is all the way across the other part of the globe. The Ukraine is on the border of Russia. We have nothing to do with the affairs that takes place in those two countries, and yet he's shipping weapons off. If they weren't on his butt about Trump and Russia, would he be so willing to ship those weapons off to try to get across this idea of, I'm fighting Putin in these multitude of ways, so you guys are saying that Trump and Russia is colluding? Well, look, I'm giving weapons to somebody who's going to be killing Russians. I think it's problematic. They're playing politics with something that's literally foreign policy politics, where these guys have missiles pointed at us, and they're completely forgetting that there's a larger world out there when they're making this charge about Trump and Russia purely for political ends.
It's exceptionally dangerous. Caitlin Johnstone makes this point. They're threatening the whole damn human race with possible
nuclear holocaust.
Escalation is the word I'm looking for. If it's out of control and escalates, and there's some sort of use of nuclear weapons, we're looking at, as you just said, nuclear holocaust. And it's not even a game. It's just this. It's like playing nuclear Russian roulette. And like, and it's all because the deep state and the establishment wants a Cold War again. I mean, that's what we were leaning toward even during Obama, was this greater distrust, all because Putin's kind of a bad guy. But
come on, it's not because he's a bad guy. We interact with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia chops off heads. In one case, I was talking to somebody who was in a campaign who had friends in Saudi Arabia saying they crucified a guy. We don't care if it's bad actors. I mean, our biggest thing is, are you friends with us? And if you're friends with us, we would turn a blind eye. So we hate Iran because Iran toppled the dictatorship that we put into place. But we're okay with Saudi Arabia as they export terrorism throughout the region. It's not purely just Putin's a bad guy. I honestly think this, to some degree, is the United States believes it's a unipolar world, like that we, for the longest time, once the Soviet Union fell apart, that we could have our way. Whatever this game of life was, the United States won. We could push our weight around and everything else. Other powers coming into the region or flexing themselves, meaning Russia saying, well, wait a minute, you can't just push everybody around. We're going to take some kind of stance in this. I think it pissed him off. I think it pisses the United States off. I think some of this is purely functioning from the standpoint of ego, with this idea of geopolitics of we're supposed to be the fulcrum around the world. But I'll give you an example. Syria is a great example. Obama administration was funding Syrian terrorists to undermine that particular government, meaning it kept that government in a civil war for longer than what that civil war would have typically have been. Russia gets involved in this conflict, bolstering the Syrian government. Now, this didn't stop Obama from putting more weapons or anything else into it. If anything, it pissed him off. Hillary Clinton was looking at this saying, we need a missile defense shield in Syria. And you're like, you're talking about investing yourself into a civil war and putting United States troops into a civil war. And the question is always, why? Like, what are we getting out of this outside of some kind of geopolitical control of a particular region? This stuff is amazing. I don't think it's the Cold War thing. Yes, I agree with you. Like this kind of new missile program and everything else. But from the standpoint of the politicians themselves, it purely seems like issues of ego and geopolitical politics.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is geopolitical politics. I don't know if it's ego as much as it's sort of a national ego, like the United States.
Yes, that's what I mean.
But yeah. You use the phrase unipolar power, and we don't want to go back to a multipolar political system again, with not even a bipolar system again, because it was kind of scary. Even though I think having the Russians are still heavily armed, at least with nuclear weapons, and what the establishment is doing with Russia threatens to return to the Cold War, which in my view, when you think of terrorism being dangerous, I lived through the Cold War. I was a nuclear freeze activist, so I didn't put it out of my head and pretend it wasn't there. I lived, breathed, ate and slept nuclear arms race. All right, so this wasn't something I just escaped from. And I found that whole period of my life, from when I first found out about it when I was in college until the Berlin Wall came down and George H.W. Bush ordered the stand down of the nuclear triad. That whole period of life was far more terrorizing to me as a citizen of the United States than anything Al Qaeda has done so far.
Yeah,
and that might be because I don't live in New York City, I don't live in D.C., I don't feel myself targeted, because the nuclear arms race and the nuclear standoff targeted all of us. Yeah, we're all targets in that situation. We all would have died had there been a major nuclear exchange sooner or later.
I guess my feeling is, but we're doing something similar. I mean,
we are.
Russia,
and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's irresponsible, and it is. And again, this is when Caitlin Johnstone first got my attention during the election, after the primaries, when she made the case that Hillary Clinton was a cold warrior and therefore more dangerous than Donald Trump.
That was my fear. I thought she was on the whole war. Yeah, I thought she was about nuclear war. When I heard missile defense shield in Syria, and I thought, who are you shooting down? Like, what planes are you shooting down? Right? Are you telling me that you're going to shoot down a Russian plane? And if you shoot down a Russian plane, what do you think the stance of Russia is going to be? Like, do you think
she was asked that in the last debate with Trump by the Fox News Chris Wallace?
Yeah,
yeah. He tried to pin her down on that, and basically she dodged the question. All right, because I went over that question multiple times, or her answer multiple times, back when I was writing for the Progressive Examiner at the time, and I talked about what a threat she was to all of us. She was the major parties last year gave us a choice between a gunshot to the chest and an arrow in the back.
Yeah, that
was the choices voters had to choose. Oh, do I want a gunshot to the chest and die quickly, or do an arrow in the back and die a little more slowly? It was a horrible choice. That's why, as I said in our previous conversation, our hashtag going into the general election was Jill or Boom.
Yeah, she was terrifying. And you talk to Hillary Clinton supporters, and these guys were in a bubble. Like, I've made this point before, where it's like, And if she shoots down a Russian jet, what do you think is going to take? And they're like, well, I mean, Russia's not going to do anything. Why do you think Russia's not going to do anything? Or they would be like, well, she doesn't really mean that. Why do you think she doesn't mean that? Like, you take the woman at her word. The woman has been a hawk for God knows how long. And you believe that all of a sudden she's going to become some dove. They were going into the contest blaming Russia for stuff. And if they're going into the contest blaming Russia, if she takes that office, what is her position going to be towards Russia? And is she going to be somewhat of a hawk? Again, this national identity thing, believing that we're a unipolar power, we can push the world around. And I actually want to get into your point on this. You said you didn't want the world to be anything other than a unipolar power. But you could see that that's somewhat problematic. If the United States is the only power in this world, the States to the point which is isolates us. Let's say completely down the United States. The United States and Israel were the main two votes in this process. Or our behavior in regards to blocking other people out the countries in the way that other countries, again, supposedly our friends, shun the behavior. Donald Trump was supposed to be going to London, and you have streets in London saying he is not welcome to this particular district. It isolates us. Like it breeds a certain behavior of we can do whatever we want. And I think there needs to be some kind of leash on us being able to do whatever we want. That's my issue with the unipolar power thing. It's one thing if you're a benevolent, power in this way, but I don't know any benevolent powers, or at the very least powers that are benevolent for long periods of time.
Just to be clear, I wasn't advocating for U.S. as a unipolar power.
Okay, I misunderstood. I'm sorry. I was like,
I was articulating the establishment's perspective. We want to be a unipolar power. We want to have our power unchallenged.
Yeah.
No, I've been a long time advocate for
cooperation,
a stronger United Nations, backed up, enforced international law, and basically the same type of thing that you hear articulated by the Green Party on foreign policy, getting out of the Middle East, and rule by law, not
just whims. It's just a whim.
Whims and military force and just whatever the United States wants, the United States gets. That's just being the bully on the block, and that's
all it is.
It's not conducive to world peace.
Let me ask you this: do you think change is possible outside of the context of something more aggressive? Let me say it that way. Like the apparatus, as the apparatus stands, do you believe it's so ossified that nothing can take place, or do you believe that there is a potential for change to take place through the system? I guess what I'm asking is, you made the quote before that at the point where change or revolution becomes impossible through the political apparatus, people go outside of that apparatus. Are we at the point where trying to get anything done through normal political means is somewhat impossible to do?
Yes, but we're not at the point where we need to cross the line into violence. I want to talk about violent revolution here in a minute.
Okay.
Yes, the way things have worked in the past aren't going to get us where we need to go. That's the whole idea of using leverage in elections, and the whole idea of presenting a populist agenda to candidates and force them into either signing that agenda, signing that contract, or lose the election, right? Because we the people are going to control. And this is unprecedented, right? Even the contract with America didn't come from the grassroots. Newt Gingrich and his Republican allies wrote that thing. That was a top-down sort of agreement. What we're doing is totally historically unprecedented, just like Bernie or Bust was unprecedented. Only this time we have the experience of having gone through a leverage election before. We're still learning things because we're taking that one experience in one election and applying it to 468 different races around the country. So, but that's the idea is, yes, no, it is ossified and it is corrupt and it is completely, and this may not work by itself. In fact, we're certain by itself it won't work. But there's also behind the CFAR or else strategy, it involves voters forming sort of the equivalent of a union by pledging to support only CFAR candidates. Again, That is historically unprecedented. We've had voter pledges before, but around this idea of a particular candidate to support a particular agenda, that's new. That's a little unprecedented. And the idea that this agenda came from the grassroots, a populist grassroots-based system. So all this is attempts to break through that ossified, corrupt, dour-drenched system that's currently in place. But there's more to it than even that. And we alluded to this a little bit in our first conversation when we talked about using the internet and the fact that more and more people are getting their information off the internet than they are off television. And that's a generational thing. The majority of people over 40 are still getting most of their information off television, and the majority of people under 40 are getting most of their information off the internet. Yep. So there is a transition, and the fact that more people are using the internet is an amazing communication machine.
It is.
And we attempted to use that. We never ran ads on television. We never raised that kind of money to run ads on television to support Bernie with the threat that we made clear in Philadelphia to the superdelegates, which was nominate Sanders or lose in November. We never had a chance to run ads to that effect. We created ads. We had 3 different ads, a 15-second, a 30-second, and a 60-second ad for the primaries. We never raised enough money to actually run on radio and television. But what we need to do is figure out new ways to use the internet. We can't forget email, but that's not going to work for everyone. So we have social media, and that's problematic because Facebook is, we end up calling it Clinton book.
Yeah.
Because they were blocking burners right and left, particularly Bernie or busters. But even people who were just posting information in support of Bernie Sanders found themselves in Facebook jail, right? Limited, you can't comment, you can't post anything on groups for 8 days or 6 days or whatever the random jail term the schmucks at Facebook wanted to impose. So there's those limitations, but there's also Twitter, and there's other ways that we're going to be able to, and we're going to have to learn to exploit and learn how to use the internet in creative ways to reach more and more people with the message that the United States needs a revolution. The whole point of my essay, published on New Year's Day almost 3 years ago now, was to foment revolution in the United States, to get people start talking about, we need a revolution. Why do we need a revolution? Well, we're moving toward a police state. We're moving toward fascism. And again, this was under Obama, not Donald Trump.
Right. And
with Trump, it's just more obvious. And I'm doing the same thing in Bernie or Bust, the book that's coming out soon. It's an attempt to foment revolution, to educate people as to understand why we need a revolution in the United States. It's not because we want a revolution. We want a woman in the White House. We don't need a woman in the White House, but we want a woman in the White House. What we need is a revolution. Ideally, Jill Stein, because that's a 2-for. We can have the revolution and a woman in the White House.
Yeah.
Or someone like that. I don't want to even go into other names because it automatically brings up disagreements. But the idea is, so in Bernie or Bust, in the introduction, and then again at the very end of the book, I encourage readers to not just sit and hold this book, but to read it and give it away, to pay it forward, so to speak, and share it and share it and share it. So my goal is, whatever number I sell of these things, whether it's 10,000 or 10 million, I want it read by 10 times as many people as who buy it, right? Because again, the idea is to foment revolution, to help people understand that these neoliberals are out to fundamentally transform the United States into a corporate order, and they need to be stopped. And this is the establishment, whether it's Clinton's or Obama's or Bush's or Rubio's, it's the centrists in both parties who are out to transform the United States, and they need to be stopped. And they are literally threatening national sovereignty, national self-determination, democratic self-determination,
civil liberties,
self-rule. civil
Yeah.
liberties. The list goes on and on. These neoliberals, Democrat and Republicans, are truly a threat, an existential threat to the democratic order such as it is in the United States. And they need to be stopped, they need to be overthrown, and you need to get people, not I want to say like Bernie Sanders, but really what I mean is democratic socialists. That ideology is an alternative to neoliberalism.
Yes,
and
is.
It's not the
Yeah.
only alternative. I mean, there's anarchism, but I'm not sure exactly how that would play out in a republic. But there's other, I mean, hardcore socialism, democratic socialism, but other alternatives to neoliberalism. Even liberalism is an alternative to neoliberalism.
Yeah,
Right?
it's like we can't have it both ways. We have this odd thing, man, where you have this oligarchical parasite that's leeching off of the system itself. So the normal processes or the processes that were put in place to allow the public to self-rule were for the most part completely undermined by cash being a part of the process. And not just cash being a part of the process, making people's lives harder. And those people don't understand that their lives are harder because of the policies that people put in place and get normalized. So it's like this becomes the norm. This becomes the balance of debate. And when you're trying to make this point of like life doesn't have to be this particular way, there are other alternatives to this. Oh, they don't like to hear that. They don't like to hear that at all. We like to keep it within these bounds. If you need a ton of cash to get elected, Hillary Clinton raised what, $1 billion. If you raise $1 billion, do they honestly believe that you're giving that money out of the kindness of your heart? Like you have these Senate races. Let's say you have a Senate or a House of Representative race. These guys don't really need to raise huge amounts of cash, but they do need to raise cash to get elected. Who are they going to for that cash? Like they're not going to just the mom and pops. They're going to people with means to give them that cash. Let's say you had a good person. Let's say that person had a good heart. That person wanted to do really good things. And that person realized, okay, in order for me to get elected, I need to take money from these people. But I'm going to try to do good things around the margins, meaning I'm going to do incremental, gradual things that don't impact the fact that this guy just gave me a large amount of cash. And no, I'm not going to touch his pet issues, but yes, around those issues, this is what I'm going to do. And get into the mindset that this is the way politics is, and this is the only way that a person can run to get elected, meaning this is the boundary of the debate, the incrementalism that takes place. They call it centrism. Ultimately, these guys are just saying, well, we're bought and we can't go beyond a certain range of latitude. You can't have it. It's like you can't have it both ways. You can't have this capitalistic system that allows so much cash to accrue on one side and then say we have a representative government that actually listens to the public itself in order to do what those people do. It is demonstrably false when you look at the evidence of how these guys vote. It is not within the public's interest. So
and then that's reflected in the study by Gillens and Page.
Yeah,
that it just doesn't work. The average citizens are not represented in Washington, period. Right? Because average citizens don't donate. They don't have the money to donate to any candidate for office. Something like 0.26% of the population donates more than $200 in election.
Think about that. Think about that. Like that means that think about for all the amount that's given in regards to money and campaign donations. And if that's how much the public gives, oh man, like that means that money is coming from completely other sources that is not necessarily in that 99% or in that public interest.
No, it's not in the 99%. There's no question about it, which is why average citizens are not represented in Washington.
Yeah.
Which is why we need a revolution. I mean, sometimes it's just that simple. We need a revolution because we are not a democratic order. All right, we are an oligarchy.
Yeah.
And that's what we see. The studies from Gillens and Page and other political scientists are starting to show that we don't have a democratic order. Even Jimmy Carter has actually come out and said we're an oligarchy, that we're not a democratic order.
I've heard,
but he supported Hillary Clinton.
I think Jimmy Carter was terrified. I think a lot of people were terrified, and Jimmy Carter shouldn't have supported Hillary Clinton, in particular since they've ostracized Jimmy Carter. Like Obama never wanted to bring him up. Bill Clinton never wanted to bring him up. They act like the guy wasn't one of the presidents. I mean, Jimmy Carter wasn't a horrible president. Yes, he started down that neolib path in that way, but I would say it's culminated with Clinton. But they act like that guy is. It blows me away that they ostracize him. That's all. Like, Jimmy Carter has done nothing wrong. Jimmy Carter has actually been a pretty decent human being after he got out of office. So it tells you something about them in a sense, in the way that they don't necessarily want to be associated with the guy. But yeah, Jimmy Carter said that. Jimmy Carter's come on, same thing. Chris Hedges, when you're listening to stuff that Chris Hedges said, Chris Hedges has gotten pretty gloomy. No, I understand why Chris Hedges has gotten gloomy. He looks at this world and says, we need movements in order to change this process. And I have no belief that this is going to take place in my lifetime, but we can't keep going the way that we're going.
I agree. I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime or not, but we certainly can't keep going the way we've been going.
I agree.
Again, revolution is not an option. It's something we absolutely have to have. It's not. It's not a choice.
What is easiest besides the point. It needs to be done.
Yeah, and it's not, and it's going to be very hard. I mean, it's very clear. I want to come back to Kennedy's quote here a second, because I looked at the possibilities of how organizing, or at least I analyzed it, organizing a violent revolution in light of what's been presented by Edward Snowden, knowing the extent to which the NSA is tapping every conversation that's taken place online, including this one. All right, how do you organize a violent revolution? All right, going out and killing a cop or a few politicians is not a violent revolution. That's an assassination.
Right. You just murdered somebody. That's the difference in those things.
And nothing ever comes of that, and that's fine. But so how would you go about? You'd have to communicate, and how do you communicate in a way that the NSA can't possibly tap into and understand?
Yeah.
Right. You'd have to use snail mail, and by the time they receive the letter, the revolution would be underway. I mean, it's just virtually impossible to, unless you use. You have to be really good. And again, how do you even trust people across the country? I don't trust the people who took the Burn Your Bus pledge. We polled them. 10% of them voted for Hillary Clinton, for God's sake. So I don't. There's all kinds of people I don't trust. And if you're going to have a revolution, particularly a violent one, where you're actually, forming an army and marching on Washington or state capitals or whatever, you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to, send orders and coordinate and communicate. And we have the internet, but how do you do it? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't get nipped in the bud? What an attempt at a violent revolution is most likely would lead to is even a greater fascistic police state, right? Because they would just clamp down on all of us.
Agreed.
So I just don't see violence. Well, violent revolution may become inevitable. It would be an act of suicide. It just wouldn't. You just can't do it against a state as powerful as the United States.
Yeah,
unless you somehow figure out a way to do it on the Tunisian model, right? That was nonviolence. It was just people taking to the streets. They didn't have an election. They forced an election. But it was just, and this is what I think Chris Hedges is pushing for. It's just mass mobilization, occupying street corners and halls and legislatures, and just a massive uprising, pitchforks and torches, if you will, against the establishment, against the way things are, against all aspects of the status quo. And general strikes would be another tool certainly available, and just start shutting down commerce in every way we possibly can. Non-violent ways. There's a Albert Einstein Institute is run by a guy who's created. He inspired a lot of these people in Europe who rose up against the communists, and some of the people in the Middle East were also inspired by this guy. I can't think of his name, but he's got whole books on and papers on nonviolent actions you could take to undertake revolutionary actions.
Because I agree with you on this. You need numbers. In any case, you need numbers. And that's the thing. When I read Chris Hedges' last piece, it always comes back to, regardless of what takes place, numbers. It's like, how do you get numbers? So I'm going to ask this. How do you wake the people up? And before I ask this, I want to give a thank you to some people because they've been awesome. Anthony Allen and None of Your Business, guys, thank you. I really appreciate it. Every little bit helps. They donated super cash to the conversation. So, guys, I absolutely appreciate it. How do you wake people up? Because ultimately, what I hear from this, and mind you, we're in perfect agreement on this. I think I think the strategy is right. I like this idea. I think you need something as leverage. I don't think you screaming at a politician is going to get a politician to do it outside of that politician being able to lose, and that politician knowing full well that he can lose, meaning he can be held accountable for him not towing a particular line and living up to what he's supposed to do. How do you wake people up to allow that club to be in effect in the first place? How do you shake them out of complacency? When Susan Sarandon was on some show, and she's like, well, maybe it'll bring on the revolution. And I think what Susan Sarandon meant is kind of what you mean. This thing of people waking up and saying, oh my God, we're being exploited. They're using $1 trillion a year to murder people abroad while we don't have healthcare at home. We don't have schools, meaning we're putting $50,000 of debt on kids. Like this type of stuff. We're ruining people's lives for ends, like for plutocratic ends, not even for their interests. Like you have a country that's the richest country on the planet, like the richest country the world has ever seen. And you have third world level poverty in some areas of the country. And you have like 60% of the country that couldn't afford to pay a $500 car note or a bill if the car got damaged. That is, I would argue, is a failure of your society at that point. Like your society, they always show the stock market and everything else. But how do you get across to people that, look, even if you're comparing yourself to the reformers that are in Europe, meaning the socialist parties that are in Europe that are going through the democratic process, you're missing stuff. Like you're missing this idea of healthcare and college. You're missing these aspects of life that actually make a life. If you're loading yourself down with all of this debt just to make ends meet, that's not a life. There's a difference in those things. It's like, how do you get people to realize that as a society, you can come to some conclusion and say, these are the things that we want to cover for the people in our society because we believe that there needs to be a floor for our society, particularly for one that is this rich and it's this affluent. How do you wake people up?
We're doing it right now. This conversation is being witnessed. Other people will come along later on and watch this conversation. I don't know if they're going to go through the whole 2 hours plus of it, but the American Revolutionary War was talked about, I believe it was 14 years before they finally fired a shot.
Oh, wow.
Right? They were talking about independence for over a decade before they finally fired a shot. And I think it was Lexington. So you have to start having this conversation, maybe not around Thanksgiving dinner tables, but one-on-one. People listening to this and understanding that whether it's whatever it is that you're most woke about, whether it's, you just alluded to, all the money we're spending to kill people, black and brown people around the world in the name of national defense, or what has become my major concern, which are the so-called free trade agreements, which, by the way, are not free trade agreements. As you said, they're not much about trade.
Yeah.
They're using free trade as a Trojan horse to impose a corporate order.
Exactly.
So that might be enough to help somebody understand, oh my God, we can't allow these neoliberals, the establishment, to win these elections anymore. You know, I'm not a socialist, but I'm going to vote for a democratic socialist this time around because that's a lot better than the neoliberals, who are basically attempting to transform the United States into this corporate dystopia. Maybe it's people inspired, if that's the right word. Pissed off, I think, is the right word, the right idea, about, you know, all these innocent people being shot by the police. It was just news again today. You know, it was a prank phone call. Someone said somebody was doing something. They weren't. The police came out on this front porch and they ended up shooting them because they didn't do exactly what the police told them to do. And I've seen video of a guy doing exactly what the police were telling him to do. He was crying. He was on his knees, and the police just unloaded his gun on him. and got away with it. So, I mean, maybe that's what motivates you to understand that whatever you vote for, it can't be a moderate is a euphemism for neoliberal. It can't be the establishment. It's got to be somebody. If you're a conservative, I would say vote libertarian, although I think they're crazier than most conservatives. Or if you're liberal, you may think progressives are too far to the left, but you got to understand what these neoliberals are doing. They're destroying this country. They are an existential threat to the democratic order in this country. And these are people like Obama and the Clintons. Kamala Harris, is that her name?
Yeah, that's her.
Cory Booker. These are
choice.
all Wall Street backed neoliberals. Follow the money. That's one thing people could do if they want to stay away from politicians who will do the bidding of Wall Street.
Yeah, just look who's paying them. You can see what they're voting based on who's paying them.
To try to get to the answer to your question, I don't think there's a single thing. I think people are going to have to come around and wake up on their own terms, whether it's over racial matters, over economic matters, over war and peace matters, over environmental matters. I mean, Chris Hedges frequently points to, the threat that the Earth is dying, right? Earth can't continue to support the civilization as we know it today. We need a rapid transformation. We need a green revolution, a rapid transformation away from fossil fuels. That's not happening. And eventually this is going to get worse and worse and worse. So maybe that's at some point will trigger, it hasn't yet, but maybe at some point things will get so bad, it'll trigger the kind of revolution that you and I are talking about. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball or a magic bullet. I just think people are going to have to wake up. And I think that's going to come from conversations like this, one-on-one, maybe a child to a parent, parent to a child, a brother to a sister, friend to a friend. Unfortunately, it can't be colleague to a colleague because you get fired for having political conversations.
Is it a conversation or crisis? Like I tend to fall into this camp of believing that crisis is usually the thing that presents opportunity. Like when things get bad, when things get, kind of this idea of calamity, that people look around and try to actually make choices, and it leaves somewhat of a window for you to actually push things in a direction.
The Chinese symbols for the word crisis are danger and opportunity.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds about right. That sounds about right. Yeah, that absolutely sounds about right. Yeah, man. Let me ask you this. Is there anything that you would like to tell our audience before we end this one? Because like you said, it went 2 hours. And we have we have a decent crowd. We have 114 people here, so that's not bad at all. Is there anything that you would like to tell the audience about anything that we talked about today or anything about the organization in general that we didn't touch upon?
I get a lot of feedback from people who took the Bernie or Bust pledge, basically, and it's not the majority of them, but it's a good number of them. When I send out an email blast to these people, some of them will get back to me and say, I give up. The establishment rigged the system, and I give up. I just can't fight this fight anymore. I'm too old. I'm too poor. I'm too this. I'm too that. I'm too busy. And that is exactly what the neoliberals want. They want us to drop out. They want us to become disengaged. They want us to go back to football or basketball or shopping or reading escape novels or anything like that to distract us, drugs, alcohol, anything to distract us away from the pain that is being imposed on us by the political operatives in Washington. So don't give up. Maybe CFAR or else isn't the way you think we should go, but whatever that way is, I support it as long as it's nonviolent. I need to make that clear so that the police don't come knocking on my door. There are so many nonviolent ways. And again, you can go to the Albert Einstein Institute online. There's all kinds of documents and books there that explain various ways you can fight this revolutionary fight. in a non-violent, peaceful manner, and I encourage that. You know, organize, get in touch. I started going to meetings recently here locally of the Tompkins County Progressives. You know, just plug in, turn in. What was the 1960s phrase? Tune in, turn on, and take over. So tune in, you know, get yourself informed. Turn on. There are so many people who are turned on by Bernie's political revolution. Well, stay turned on. Don't turn the knob off just because he got robbed, just because they rigged the system. Stay turned on, and then help us take over. You know, I'm not running for office. That's not my thing. But I'm certainly going to be helping people get elected. So help progressives, help democratic socialists defeat the neoliberals. And whatever you do, don't hold your nose and vote for the neoliberals. Yes, that means the GOP will probably win. So be it. If the Democrats lose elections, you know, year after year after year, in 10 or 20 years, they're going to figure out we're going to have to stop being neoliberals and start doing what the people want us to do. If we're going to get elected, that's going to have to come from support for, you know, higher education, Medicare for all, getting out of these endless wars, and any number of the things that are listed on the Contract for American Renewal. So tune in, turn on, and help us take over. That's as simply as I can put it.
I want to add one more item to that. Trust. So you mentioned that each person has their own thing. Like somebody says, I don't like people being shot by cops. Anthony Allen. Oh, thanks, dude. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jamal. Keep doing what you're doing. You appreciate it. Word up. Dude, you have no idea how much appreciate this. Lost my place. Oh, I know what I was saying. So you made this point that regardless, whatever your thing is, like, I don't like blacks getting shot by cops. I don't like anybody getting shot by cops. I don't like cops having the authority that they have in our society. I think they have massively too much power, particularly when you're talking about one-on-one with citizens. I fall on the spectrum of libertarian on this point. Leave me to my devices if I am not doing anything that's, you know, that's wrong. Cops shouldn't be able to harass people in this way. Let's say that's your issue. You also need to stand up for other issues. Like, you can't be isolated. That's the point I would like to make on this. Even though it's your specific issue, you're united with each and every person in this country. So yes, there are going to be issues where women stand up during the Me Too, the resistance, and everything else. You should be standing right there by her, even if that's not your particular issue. If it's environmental, same thing. If it's Black Lives Matter, same thing. I think all of these issues boil down to the crux of one specific point, meaning I look at this stuff through the issues of class, this kind of capitalistic thing, and how it puts, so like, for example, environmental issues. It's like, do you honestly believe that anything is going to take place in regards to oil pipelines if these oil pipelines are going to be a profitable endeavor? Meaning, if there's $20 billion on the line for this pipeline, do you believe that you having a sit-in or a strike is going to in any way stop that oil pipeline from taking place? The problem is the root cause of that is the incentive structure in the process itself. So it's like, all of these groups who are out here behaving in a particular way need to understand that a lot of this stuff really does boil down to one specific issue. So it's like, yes, you're having your particular issue, be it issues of identity, be it issues of income inequality, those things. But those things are rooted in one case. You're not isolated. You're not separate and distinct. And considering yourself atomized like this, even from the standpoint of atomized into just groups, you lose something out this prospect. That's all. It's like, you're absolutely right. Definitely get involved. But look at yourself, not necessarily as an individual group, but as a society itself, if that makes sense. It's like the freedom of the other person is your freedom also. You're not separate and distinct from everybody else. You're part of a whole. So I would, that's the point I would make. What do they call it? Intersectionality, I guess.
Yeah, it is intersectionality. I almost hate to do this, but I got to bring it back to the Contract for American Renewal.
No,
that's a series of issues there that might not be your specific thing. So yeah. I'll give you a very concrete example. The local candidate here in New York 23rd District signed a Contract for American Renewal. What's my specific issue? On those 11, it's overturning Citizens United. Yeah. Right? That's the thing that I'm most informed about. That's the thing I worked on before there was Bernie or bust, before I even became a revolutionary. The local candidate who signed this contract didn't add that to his list of 7 items from the contract, overturning Citizens United. I'm disappointed, but I'm not going to abandon him because he didn't embrace my issue.
Right,
he did the CFAR thing, and so I'm not going to say anything to him about it. I'm not going to express my disappointment. I'm going to get behind him 100% all the way because he embraced the whole concept and the whole thing.
Yeah.
So the CFAR has the potential of overcoming some of this single issue activism. Are you a peace activist? Let's get out of Afghanistan. That's part of the CFAR. Are you environmentalist? Let's transform the energy sector. That's part of the CFAR. Are you for single-payer healthcare? Let's get behind the CFAR. Let's get candidates to sign the CFAR. That's part of that agenda.
And by the way, BLM, like Democrats like to make this argument that identity has nothing to do with economics. They couldn't be further from the truth. If we're having a conversation about an African-American or somebody else, Hispanic, African-American, a poor individual being shot by a cop in a dark alley or something to that effect, and you start looking into the reasons of, well, why is that person in that situation in the first place? Why does that cop have that particular perspective, et cetera, et cetera? But what you eventually get down bare bones to is, what is the economic situation of that particular individual? And if that person was in a different economic situation, would the situation have even come up where he was interacting with the cop in the first place? Like, economics plays a large role in a lot of this stuff. Your freedom as an individual is completely tethered to how much cash you have in your pocket, your access to, goods and supplies and everything else, where you live, sleep, eat, the air that you breathe. All those things are dependent upon cash. If you're saying, which is true, that African Americans have more desperate levels of poverty, let's say it that way, particularly after the crash, then you can make a case that says identity and economics merge and meet in this case when we're talking about economic freedom and the decision space of an individual, of a person of color. Leaving out economics in the conversation. Martin Luther King, one of the things that he was bringing up was this issue of income inequality. It's like, how can you say that you're free in a society if you don't have the cash to engage in that society? It's like, you have the freedom to die on the street without health care. That's great, but is that really a freedom that you want? I guess my point is, you can't separate identity from economics. Those things are inextricably linked when you're talking about poverty and you're talking about certain demographics in this country and the wealth that a particular demographic has in this country. And in this case, I'm speaking specifically to African Americans because I've seen the charts, and the charts are abysmal. They're abysmal. I make this point always, and I know people, they're like, this guy always talks about class. I think it does boil down to class. Anti-war. If there's a profit in war, how are you going to stop them from doing these wars? Part of the reason that you have these money and all this moneyed interest behind this stuff is because it's profitable. The United States is spending $1 trillion. It's spending their money somewhere. Somebody is getting that money. Somebody's putting it in his pocket. War is a profitable industry. The other one, environment. Again, if you're getting billions of dollars for an oil industry, why on earth would the oil industry do anything that would help solar power or renewables? They have a vested interest into inhibiting those things from taking place. It's not about the social impact at that point. It becomes, how much profit can we make in this game space? Well, what was the next one? I mean, you can go down the list on these things.
Yeah, you're opening up a door for an entire another conversation. Yeah, because you're making the case that it's class, and I would argue every one of your examples, that's not about class. It's about structure. What structure? The structure of the corporation itself. This entity that has 3 purposes: to survive, right? Yeah. No one wants to go out of business. To make a profit, and to grow, so you can make a bigger profit. So you can grow and make a bigger profit, and it's an endless cycle. And that's a structural thing. It leads to class differentiations. Yeah. But I think the problem is a structural problem of what to do about these entities, these structurals, these transnational, particularly the transnational corporations. There is an evil that exists in corporations that are large and growing and continue into perpetuity. Well, that is a paraphrase from James Madison. Madison himself recognized the danger of large and growing corporations that continue into perpetuity.
it goes to a deeper issue when when I use the term class, I just mean the capitalistic model itself. This thing that allows this profit motive where social impact doesn't matter. Like,
right.
so an
But
oil
that's a
company would say,
structural thing. I don't think it is class.
I agree. No, it leads to class, I guess I'm saying.
It does lead to class, but that's an outcome of the actual problem. The problem itself is
the problem is
structural through the capitalism, through this capitalism as it has developed through these large corporations, or any corporation that continues to grow and continue into perpetuity. I support small corporations that are owned by the original entrepreneur.
Yeah.
This is Schumpeter's destructive creativity, right? New systems, new corporations come along, replace old corporations. Steamships replace sail ships. Internal combustion engines replace the steamships. All this is the advance of technology and progress, largely. Not always healthy, but it displaces the new, displaces the old. Right? Yeah, but so there's a certain healthiness to it, destructive creativity that helps people advance, and it destroys some companies because they have obsolete technology and obsolete systems or corporate entities, obsolete systems. Obsolete products or obsolete services, and that's not necessarily bad. Where it gets bad is when it gets larger and larger, becomes transnational, and continues into perpetuity. So who's the founder of Apple? Steve Jobs. He's dead. He's gone. So at that point, the model of I don't even want to use the word capitalism. The model of corporatism can be changed by law from this entrepreneurial free enterprise that he built to a worker ownership system.
Worker co-op.
Right? He's gone. So let the workers take over Apple. All the ones in China, all the ones in wherever Apple has a footprint on the ground, those workers should become the new owners.
They own the company. I partially agree with you. So I've always argued that the problem is capitalism. And to explain exactly what I mean by that structurally we've created a system that tells people that they need to maximize their profit. Meaning, regardless of what takes place, we have these machines that are built purely for the sake of profit, that externalizes costs, that maximizes their own profits, and oftentimes at the expense of other people. The problem I have with that particular model is that I don't know how you create a constraint and say, this is the border, meaning those corporations or these businesses can't expand beyond a certain point. The incentive structure of it is to grow and expand in the way that it grows and expands, meaning at some point, it is going to want to maximize its profit in a way that goes beyond the degrees or beyond the boundaries that you've set by law. And in which case, they're going to try to reach their fingers in the political apparatus. Like it's somewhat of a cancer. I hate to use that term in the way Donna Brazile says it. But you've told everybody in your society that find ways to maximize your profit. We don't even care how you got the money. Just the very fact that you got the money, that's all that matters. Even status being associated with this idea of profit, since the opposite of it is destitution. Nobody wants to be destitute. The opposite of it is status. I guess what I'm saying is to say that I'm okay with small corporations and we're going to somehow keep those small corporations in a box. I don't know how you keep those small corporations in a box that prevents them from trying to reach themselves into whatever political apparatus is there in order to expand their boundaries and expand their profits. How do you put a border or how do you put a line around how corporations can grow?
Well, I don't have all those answers. I did suggest that the demise of the original entrepreneur is the crossover point from
the worker co-ops,
entrepreneurial free enterprise to whatever you want to call it, this post-capitalist worker-controlled, worker-owned
co-ops. Richard Wolff
co-ops, whatever you want, and I think that can be mandated. But I think before we get to that point, there has to be. You actually just said it. We're brainwashed. We're programmed in thinking maximizing profits is a perfectly normal and healthy activity.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Part of the process has to be, or is it? Maybe this isn't the best thing for society at large. Maybe this isn't even the best thing for the corporation itself. Maybe we need to rethink our fundamental purposes, right? Maybe we're not here to maximize profits. Maybe we're here to love, to cherish, to appreciate beauty, and to engage in friendships and all the other things that make us human and not corporations.
Agreed. I absolutely agree. I don't understand people who they act as if God himself or herself or itself has said, you must work, period. And they've taken that on as if this is the only way of life or only way to arrange ourselves. We're not at a point of scarcity. Like, we've reached to the point, my wife has more coats and clothes and shoes than, like 2 or 3 people could do with. I met that woman, and as I met her, I realized that my own closet started to grow, having all of these, Converse and all this other stuff, Chuck Taylors. It's not that we need that much. She has an entire closet of shit that she doesn't wear. Same with me, and I would wager that most people in this country is the same thing. At a certain point, it just becomes advertisement to get you to buy more, not because you need it, just purely to get you to buy more. The businesses themselves, the model that we use would collapse if you didn't have people in this kind of filthy excess in the way that we go about our affairs, that we call this stuff just rational behavior. The computer, this laptop that I'm talking to you with now, this thing within a year or two is going to fall apart. Not because it needed to fall apart in a year or two, but because if it didn't fall apart, I wouldn't be able to buy another computer and those people wouldn't be able to stay in business. We've created a Ponzi scheme where people need to consistently buy stuff to keep other people employed and essentially to keep that cycle going round and round, burning the resources of a finite planet. This is a problematic system. Like, I think it goes beyond like this thing of I think some of these things can stay in place and yet we can have a better world. I think it is, I agree with you, it's systemic, but I look at it as, if it's systemic, there's certain fundamental things that are built into the system in the way it is that cause the system to behave in the way that it behaves, meaning the way people naturally act. None of this behavior is natural. This behavior is spurred on by the system itself, meaning if you tell somebody that your needs are not going to be met unless you work, well, that person is going to try to find a plantation to work. If you tell somebody else that it doesn't matter if you have $40 billion, that person is, they may get $40 billion and think it's perfectly okay for them to have $40 billion and to step over the homeless guy as they get into their limo. This is a sick society. And I guess what I'm getting at is, I don't know if it's enough to just say we're going to put a box around the corporate thing, particularly if the kernel of it, the programming itself, the maximizing your profit aspect of our society is the thing that creates the world to which we find ourselves. I guess I'm a little bit more skeptical on the capitalistic system. I guess that's where I'm at. I'm not a socialist or anything else. I agree with a lot of Marx's, or even for that matter, Lenin's, his appraisal of state and capitalism, that type of stuff. I'm not ideologically bent in the way of saying I'm one thing or the other. I look at this stuff as, what can the planet carry and what do people need, and build a society around that. I don't know if maximizing profit is one of those tenets that gets carried over.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I also agree with you that it's that making that transition from an entrepreneurial free enterprise structure to a worker co-op or collective or whatever that might be, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's the only answer. I think that's one of the many things that
particularly transition, like transitioning into something else. Like, because look, the worker co-op thing at the very least will stop them from bleeding jobs. Like, if you're owning the company, are you going to ship your own job to Singapore or somewhere? Probably not. Are you going to give somebody $1 billion at the company? Again, probably not. Your wages are going to be higher. You're going to have more control over your work, and you're probably not going to lose your job, shipping your job. But that doesn't touch environment at all. Like,
that's right.
It solves specific issues. And if we're talking about trend, but it also is one other issue. It decapitates this idea of the elites. Like, it completely, if you're talking about a revolt against plutocracy, the process completely eliminates the plutocrat from the process. You don't have the guy making $1 million, $2 million, $10 million in a company. That guy doesn't exist anymore. And if you could propagate that all throughout the United States, you eliminate one plutocrat after the next from one company after the next.
Well, we're a long ways away from that, and
That is true. That is true.
but I think it's healthy to just start conceptualizing some of these things that need to happen going forward. That it's not doesn't make you necessarily a I'm certainly not a Marxist.
No,
It
no.
doesn't make you a bad guy because you think capitalism and this system of endless accumulation and endless growth is somehow unhealthy. It's basically unsustainable, and it's going to destroy the planet. If we, as you said, it's an infinite process on a finite planet. So I think, again, part of what needs to happen is exactly what we're doing here, is to have this conversation, have conversations with other people, friends, relatives, and start that it's an uncomfortable conversation at first, particularly if you're talking to a libertarian. Why do we need a revolution? Everything's fine the way it is. Well, not really. But I mean, that's it. So, I mean, Bernie sort of brought up revolution out of the blue, and some people, I think, were caught off guard, and a lot of people got behind that. I don't know how the hell he lost the Democratic primaries. He was filling coliseums. Hillary Clinton could barely fill a gym.
Pretty much.
So, I just can't see how the hell she won that thing legitimately. And we alluded to the cheating that had to take place, but we do need, there's just so many things. It's easy to think I'm going to burn out, especially these are all things that have to be done after many of us come home from work. We work 40 hours and we have family lives and we have all these other things on our plate. But maybe you give up, watching football, or maybe you give up watching basketball, or give up some aspect of your life that's not really useful and productive. Sure, it's relaxing and you're a fan, and there's a certain amount of community you feel around that, but there's community around political activism too. And
yes, it is.
So we certainly need to change some of the aspects of our life, and our consuming habits, I think, are one of them.
Yeah,
I made some videos arguing that one way to defeat Donald Trump is to go on a consumption diet. Don't buy anything you don't absolutely need that's new.
make it
If
hurt.
you need to replace a car, go out and get a used car.
Yeah.
If you need, well, obviously you need food. You can't buy used food. It's kind of gross to think about. But say batteries for a flashlight or whatever. Some things you have to have. You need them, and they have to be new. But if you don't have to have something new, don't buy something new. Go out and get used clothing. Go out and get used cars. Go out and just avoid buying new things, and that will cause the economy to decline. Right? They can make Wall Street can go all kinds of off the chart limits, or out of the boundary limits.
Mm-hmm.
But if people aren't buying stuff, eventually that's going to come crashing down.
Yeah.
And why do you want to help Donald Trump by buying new crap that you don't absolutely need? It's a strategy I came up with. It didn't really catch on, but in this point of the conversation, I think it was worth mentioning. We can defeat, and believe me, both sides could play this game. If Bernie Sanders had been elected, there would be capital flight, right? The capitalists know about this. In fact, It's called a parliament of capital, right? They vote with their feet. If Bernie Sanders had been elected, corporations would be pulling out of the United States right and left.
They would try.
They would be voting with their feet. But the thing is, you can have a parliament of consumers too. We also have that same power. We can just boycott new crap that we don't absolutely need. We can do that, and it'll set the economy on its heels, and it'll help Donald. It'll even help this year if we can reverse the economy. Right now, it's starting to take off, and this tax bill, in theory, will help things improve even more. So just save your money. You don't have to spend your money. If you get more money because of this tax cut, stick it in a savings account or even invest it. But the thing you don't want to do is buy crap, because the economy is based on us buying crap that we don't need.
Yes,
so if we stop buying crap that we don't need, we can actually bring this economy to our knees. It's just a matter of
numbers.
Self-discipline.
And you
numbers and self-discipline.
Yeah. This thing of numbers, make them hurt, and it's like political alignment for the public. It is, for whatever reason, it seems to be the hardest thing in the world to get, like getting the public to like, hey, look, you're being exploited. You're being exploited. What are you talking about? This is like it's. And look, I think back to myself in this case. I voted for Ralph Nader, even before I was politically aware. But I try to think back, what was I like, and what were the conversations I was having with regards to politics? And I got to be honest, I don't even think I was aware of what was going on. So that, I think that's the most terrifying aspect of this, is these people are functioning in a way where they may dislike something, but they're not paying close enough attention. And look, I can't blame them. I mean, you work 40, 50 hours a week at a job that you actually absolutely despise. And then you get home and it's like, what do you want to spend your energies on? Do you also want to take extra hour or two to pay attention to the political leaders who are fucking you over royally? I don't blame them. I understand where they're coming from, but at a certain point it becomes necessary, not necessarily that it's easy. And I think we're at the necessary point. So I agree with you on this big time. I hope the best for this, because I like it. There's one point I want to make too, and before closing. Oftentimes people make the less worse argument, and they would say, like Sam Cedar made this argument, one less concentration camp. And it's like, but you're still voting for concentration camps. Like pretending that you're not grading on a curve. Pretend that there's an asteroid that's going to hit the planet in 15 years or 20 years. And Republicans aren't going to do squat about it, meaning they're going to get hit by that asteroid. They're not going to do anything about it. Democrats are going to say, look, we believe in that asteroid, so we're going to move the car a little slower. But they still get hit with the asteroid because the things that they're doing are so gradual, piecemeal, and incremental that they don't actually solve the problem, that you have a pressing time clock on that problem. So I don't think it's a bad idea in the least to say, well, look, our only chance of getting anything done is for it to go through the left. And if that means the destruction of the Democratic Party in order to get something that actually addresses those particular issues, then that's what takes place. If that means the Democratic Party completely is obliterated and is reformed into something else, it's like the Democratic Party is dead, long live the Democratic Party, that's fine too. I'm apolitical on it. I don't care.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear people make these arguments as if there is not a ticking clock, as if this can go on forever. And you can just put in one status quo person after the next in perpetuity for God knows how long. And I don't think that's the case. These guys are talking about catastrophic climate change. Take all the issues off, the economic issues, everything else. They're talking about catastrophic climate change, something that is going to be global in its nature. They're looking at the results and they're saying, hey, when we do additional tests on this, we're looking at the worst case scenario, not the middle of the road, the worst case scenario. Both parties are repugnant in the way that they try to deal with this issue. And so if I'm stuck in the situation of, okay, Republicans aren't going to do anything, Democrats at least give it lip service, what is my vehicle to try to change this particular thing? And if I'm stuck in this situation of, okay, both parties are repugnant, neither party are going to do anything else, one party is going to be a little bit least worse, but ultimately I'm still going to get hit by the asteroid. I don't think it's crazy in the least to say I am not going to co-sign something that's going to get me killed later on. And that I am not going to co-sign it, particularly if the responsibility of this party is to do something about it. If that means that they lose this election cycle, then they lose this election cycle. If that means they lose the next election cycle, then they lose the next election cycle. At some point, they would come to their senses that these people aren't voting for us in the way that we're functioning.
Or alternatively, enough people will come to their consensus to realize that these two major parties aren't helping them, won't help us, and start voting for the third party candidates and have the Green Party actually, or some other third party, progressive party, come to the fore, start winning elections, and again, that's another vehicle for revolution, is to move to the left with a third party.
Agreed.
But again, it's a numbers game. How do you get this to happen? Start talking revolution.
Agreed. I agree with you, man. I totally appreciate you coming on, and I
appreciate you having it. I really do. It's a conversation that I don't get to have here at the house very often.
My wife, I do my channel, and she gets annoyed sometimes with it. It's like this is the other woman. It's like, you're going to the room. Yes, I'm going to the room. Okay, yeah, that type of stuff. But I find that the conversation is good and it's substantive. And it's one of those things that I think needs to take place. you always have this conversation between the reformers versus the people who want the revolution. You know, the reformists believe in we can change it, we can be piecemeal, we can fix it. And the revolutionaries are like, there is no way to fix that process. You need something completely different. So I'm on board with this. If I would, any press announcements and everything else that you have that you guys are putting out, let me know. I'm going to be checking in and everything else because I think this is an awesome idea. So
I appreciate that. I appreciate having me on, and we'll certainly keep you up to date. There are 16 candidates who have currently taken or signed the contract.
Very nice. Do you have their names?
Not off the top of my head. I have to go to my website.
If you send them to me, I can put them at the bottom of the box so people can see who those people are.
Sure.
Very cool. I want to thank you. I'm going to end it. We've gone for almost like 2.5 hours. I've kept you for too long. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go that long. When we're having a good conversation, I just like the conversation to keep going.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. But my eyes are turning yellow.
Yeah, right. So, guys, I would like to thank you guys for showing up. This is Victor Tiffany from CFAR, the creator of Bernie or Bust, and is now CFAR or Else. And this is Revolt against Plutocracy. So thank you very much again. And guys, you have a good night. And like I always say, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe. And of course, you can always support through Patreon, in this case, Super Chat. And again, guys, Anthony Allen and None of Your Business, thank you very much. It's always appreciated. So you guys have a good night.